If you've gone to the movies in the 21st century, more than likely you've heard of Christopher Nolan. Probably best known for his work on the Dark Knight trilogy, Chris has worked on some really ambitious movie projects in the last 20 years, and Tenet is no exception. Tenet was nominated for 2 Academy Awards, but earned only 1 for Best Visual Effects. The plot follows the protagonist, an unnamed CIA operative turned Tenet agent, on a globe-trotting adventure to prevent the end of the world. Despite receiving mixed reviews from critics, I believe Tenet to be Chris Nolan's best film for one reason. Hidden below its stunning visual effects, I believe the true lasting value of Tenet is its meta-criticism of the modern film industry and its masterful delivery of some pretty complex and interesting themes. If you want to hear more on my review of the film, please see in the description, I'll link to that. Welcome to the channel. If you've never been here before, this is Movie Readings, where I take entire Hollywood scripts and read them from start to finish right here on YouTube. These take hours to make, so it could really help me out if you would subscribe to the channel, like this video, and of course comment below with what you would like the next movie reading to be. Enjoy Tenet 2020. Orchestra tuning, audience settling. High officials in glassed-in boxes toast each other, doors closing. Bam! From behind the orchestra, terrorists with machine guns burst in. The audience screams. The terrorists cover the ordinary people. The high officials are held in the boxes. We cut to a van in a plaza, downtown Kiev, Ukraine. As police flood the plaza, the driver turns to the passenger. In Ukrainian, "Wake up the Americans." The passenger turns to the back, where 4 black-clad young men sit waiting. The nearest one seems to be sleeping. "Hey!" Eyes closed, the young man cocks his weapon, chambering around, pops it out of the slide and catches it, opens his eyes. This is the protagonist. The passenger nods, okay. The driver looks down at a variety of uniform patches. Sirens. The Americans shoulder weapons and put on helmets. A Ukrainian SWAT van screeches to a halt outside the theater. The passenger spots its marking and tosses the corresponding patches to the Americans, who slap them onto their shoulders. Ukrainian SWATs pour out of the SWAT van. The Americans jump out of the back of their van, slipping unnoticed into the stream of SWATs pouring into the lobby. SWATs mass at each entrance of the lobby of the concert hall. The protagonist watches gas canisters brought in to the air conditioning system. The SWATs put on gas masks. A well-dressed man sitting next to a uniformed official looks down into the stalls. People slump unconscious in a wave. He turns to the official, who motions calm, draws a sidearm. A terrorist wets a rag in a drinking fountain and ties it around his nose and mouth. Others have workman's respirators and face masks. They cock their weapons, preparing. The SWATs breach the concert hall, pouring into the theater, exchange gunfire with the terrorists. Running, fast but silent. Following the 4 Americans, they hit a junction. Hand signals. They split 2 ways. We follow 2 of them. One of them peels off up a staircase. Follow the last, the protagonist, checking each box. The protagonist bursts in and takes out the official beside the well-dressed man. "We live in a twilight world." The well-dressed man stares, shocked. "We live in a twilight world." The well-dressed man focuses. "And there are no friends at dusk. You've been made. This siege is a blind for them to vanish you." "But I've established contact." "Bring you in or kill you. I have 2 minutes. Make up your mind." The well-dressed man nods and climbs to his feet. "Where's the package?" "Coat check." He hands the protagonist a numbered ticket. The battle between SWATs and terrorists rages. SWATs move down the corridor, checking the boxes one by one. The protagonist smashes the glass and checks the drop to the stalls. pulls out a black rope and ties it to a column. As they drop, terrorist gunfire rings out and they land, hiding amongst the unconscious audience. The well-dressed man takes a seat and feigns sleep. The protagonist rolls under the seats. Blam! Terrorists near the stage open fire. Shots ring out, hitting 2 sleeping audience members nearby. The well-dressed man twitches. The protagonist holds his ankle, urging him to keep still. Blam! The 3rd sleeping audience member is shot. The protagonist jumps up, drawing the terrorist's fire away. The protagonist races toward 2 Ukrainian SWATs who cover him from the terrorists. One of them goes down. The protagonist takes cover beside the real Ukrainian SWAT, who's planting a bomb under the seats. He gestures to the dead SWAT's pack. The protagonist unzips the bag to find a bomb, counting down in sync with the other bomb. In Ukrainian, impatient. What are you doing? The Ukrainian SWAT uses his gun to prod the Velcro patch on the protagonist's shoulder, and it falls off. Who are you? The protagonist is at a loss. Bam! The Ukrainian SWAT is taken out by another SWAT. No friends at dusk, huh? You'll do. The protagonist grabs the bomb, points at the well-dressed man. To the SWAT, get him to the rally point. The SWAT leads the well-dressed man down a fire exit. The protagonist races across the lobby, gunfire ringing out. He jumps over the counter into the coat check area. Landing on the floor next to an unconscious coat check girl, he spots another bomb. 423, 422. The protagonist checks the number on the coat check ticket and efficiently moves across numbered racks until he finds a sports bag. He unzips it and finds a black metallic object the size of a softball. He stuffs it into his pack and scrambles over the counter. The protagonist runs, checking numbers on doors. He stops at a door and throws it open. He jumps in low. 3 SWATs, guns trained, and a well-dressed man. The protagonist throws a bomb to SWAT 2, then shows the object to the well-dressed man. I've never seen encapsulation like this. We don't know how old it is. It's the real deal. Did you have an out? Service tunnel to the sewers. Swap clothes. The SWAT and well-dressed man start changing. The protagonist hands SWAT 3 the object. Take this, take him, take his exit. I don't trust ours anymore. To SWAT number 2. Can you defuse it? SWAT 2 shakes his head. Centrally synchronized. Are there more? The protagonist nods and stuffs the bomb in his pack, covering their tracks. Taking out the audience? Just the cheap seats. That's not our mission. Mine now. The newly dressed target steps up. I'm with you. The Ukrainians are expecting a passenger. The protagonist and the target race through the sleeping audience collecting bombs. The timers tick down. 158, 157. Crouched at a bomb, the protagonist notices a bullet hole in the side of the chair. A tiny whiff of smoke is gathering. Click. A gun to his head. He spins around to see a SWAT. 34, 33. The target has his own gun on the SWAT. It's a standoff, and all around them, unconscious civilians. Walk away. You don't need to kill these people. The protagonist turns back to the bomb. 32, 31. At the bullet hole, the puff of smoke thickens. The protagonist, confused, reaches toward it. The SWAT cocks his weapon. Blam! With explosive force, the bullet hole disappears. A nick has appeared in the protagonist's uniform. He spins. The SWAT is shot through the chest and drops, revealing a figure, also in a gas mask and tactical gear. The figure turns. The protagonist sees on the figure's pack a small talisman, a coin with a hole tied to a zip by orange and yellow thread. The protagonist turns back to grab the bomb. That wasn't one of us. I'll take the help. The protagonist grabs the last bomb. 003. He looks up to the boxes where real SWATs evacuate the high officials. The protagonist lobs the bomb up to the boxes. The protagonist and the target emerge, an explosion above them. Innocent civilians stir under the explosion in the boxes. The van pulls up, rear door open, and they jump inside. The protagonist pulls off his mask, breathing. The passenger turns and grabs the target's face. Something is wrong. The protagonist turns to the driver, who has a gun pointed at him. A black screen. Screaming. The protagonist's screaming. Clothes on his eyes, flickering, sweating, pleading, defiant. And we are now in a rail yard. The protagonist tied to a chair in a windswept rail yard. In front of him, the target also tied to a chair, back to us. The driver steps back, sweating, bloody pliers in hand. The driver breathless. A man can be trained to hold out for about 18 hours. The driver gestures at a clock on the table. So your colleagues will clear by 7. The driver pushes the target's chair over. The target lands hard on his side on the gravel, groaning. He didn't last 18 minutes. The driver pulls out a knife and leans into the protagonist. But he didn't have anything to hide. You were smuggling a nobody. The knife moves toward the protagonist's throat. Risky. Then to his collar, which he cuts. Or were you counting on this? He pulls out a silver capsule. The protagonist stares. Death. CIA issue. The driver tosses the pill and waves the pliers at the clock. Spare yourself once they're clear. The protagonist looks at the clock, 5:38. A freight train rumbles past, close. As we close in on the clock, the protagonist's screams are drowned out by the freight train. The driver steps back. The protagonist breathes heavy, blood dribbling. The driver follows his gaze to the clock. 6:53. Then checks his watch. He frowns theatrically and picks up the clock and shakes it. Running fast. The driver sets the hand back 1 hour. The protagonist watches despairing. As the driver puts the clock back on the table, the protagonist notices the target's finger wiggling. In them is a silver pill. Freight trains rumble past in opposite directions, sound building. The driver approaches, bloody pliers in hand. We were alone. I didn't ask, which means we're finally getting somewhere. The protagonist hurls himself onto the target's hands, face smashing. He gets the pill into his mouth and bites down. Deafening train noise. Arms grab at him. Hands pry his jaws as he seizes, mouth foaming. The protagonist's eyes glaze, and we cut to a black screen, with the super title, Tenet. The protagonist opens his eyes. A man stands beside his bed, swaying gently. This is Faye. Welcome to the afterlife. The protagonist lifts his head. We are on a boat at sea. The protagonist sees the steely ocean swell. You've been in a medically induced coma while we got you out of Ukraine and rebuilt your mouth. The pills are fake? We swapped yours for a sedative. Why? A test. The protagonist runs a finger around his mouth, realizing. Test? They pulled my teeth out. Faye lets that dissipate. The protagonist closes his eyes. Did the team get clear? No. Private Russians, we think. Somebody talked. Not you. You chose to die instead of giving up your colleagues. The protagonist stands in the wind, contemplating the horizon. We all believe we'd run into the burning building, but until we feel that heat, we can never know. You do. I resign. You don't work for us. You're dead. The protagonist turns to Faye, confused. Your duty transcends national interests. This is about survival. Whose? Everyone's. There's a cold war. Cold as ice. To even know its true nature is to lose. This is knowledge divided. All I have for you is a gesture. He interlaces his fingers. In a combination with a word. Tenet. Use it carefully. It'll open the right doors, but some of the wrong ones too. That's all they've told you? The test you passed? A beat. Not everybody does. Faye breaks eye contact with the protagonist. The boat continues to nose into the swell. The protagonist is driven away from the boat on a launch toward a giant white turbine of the ocean wind. The launch slips amongst them, seeking the ladder of a particular one. The protagonist climbs the ladder to a door. He tries it. It's open. He turns to see the launch move off into the gathering dark. The protagonist enters the wind turbine. In the bare space, the protagonist finds a sports bag, a cot, a pallet of water, and protein bars. He opens the sports bag to find passports, cash, credit cards, and a high-vis vest. Under the vest is a small black cylinder. He unscrews the top to find 3 silver suicide pills. The protagonist shakes his head as he tosses them back into the bag. The protagonist eats, drinks, and exercises by climbing the endless interior ladders of the turbine. The stash of food and water shrinks. The protagonist does pull-ups at the very top of the ladder, feet dangling over the vertiginous drop. The protagonist is woken by a repeated air horn. He pulls himself off the cot and opens the door to find a large catamaran nosed up to the windmill, ladder in place, maintenance crew in high-vis vests moving on and off the turbine. Other boats service other turbines. The protagonist pulls on his vest and climbs down onto the catamaran. The protagonist disembarks with the rest of the wind farm crew. As they file past a car, the driver, also in high vest, steps out onto the line, leaving the door open, engine running. The protagonist gets in. The GPS is already set. Later, a bland suburban office park. The protagonist gets out of the car, wearing his high-vis and carrying a clipboard. Heads inside, passing numerous staff. The protagonist moves through the lobby unimpeded. Checking the tenant listing, he sees Wind Farm Transition. B2. The corridor. The protagonist walks up to B2. A female voice off-screen. With a high-vis vest and a clipboard, you can get almost anywhere. Almost. The protagonist turns to find a brusque young woman. This is Barbara. He joins his hands, interlacing the fingers. A pretty obscure tenant. Using a keycard, she ushers him through the door into an office laboratory. She hands the protagonist a cup of tea. No small talk, nothing that might reveal who we are or what we do. I thought I was here to find out what we do. You're not here for what, you're here for how. What is your department, and not my business? Well, to do what I do, I need some idea of the threat we face. Barbara considers the protagonist and sips her tea. As I understand it, we're trying to prevent World War III. Nuclear holocaust? No, something worse. Barbara hands the protagonist a semi-automatic. He reflexively checks the chamber and magazine, which are empty. Aim it and pull the trigger. The protagonist shrugs and lifts the empty pistol, sights a target 25 meters away with several holes in it. He squeezes the trigger, and bam! A shot. He's confused. Check the magazine. The protagonist checks the clip. There's a round in it. How? Barbara pulls on protective gloves and removes the round from the clip, placing it next to an identical one on a table. One of these bullets is like us, traveling forward through time. The other one going backwards. Can you tell which is which? The protagonist shakes his head. Barbara reaches forward. How about now? One of the rounds flies up into her hand, falling in reverse. The protagonist is taken aback. Barbara holds the round toward him so he can inspect it. It's inverted. Its entropy runs backward, so to our eyes, its movement is reversed. We think it's a type of inverse radiation, triggered by nuclear fission. You didn't make it? We don't know how, yet. So where did it come from? Someone's manufacturing them in the future. They're streaming back at us. Barbara places the round on the table in front of a camera. Try it. He puts on a glove and moves his hand over it. Nothing. You have to have dropped it. The protagonist reaches out again, and it leaps up into his hand. How can it move before I touch it? She cues up the recording of what he just did. From your point of view, you caught it, but from the bullet's point of view, she plays it backward. You dropped it. On the screen, the round falls from his hand. But cause has to come before effect. No, that's just how we see time. She pulls the round toward herself using one finger. The round follows her finger as if magnetized. What about free will? The bullet wouldn't have moved if you hadn't put your hand there. Either way we run the tape, you made it happen. She launches it up with her other hand. Don't try to understand it. Just feel it. Barbara plays with the round in increasingly improbable, beautiful movements. The round shoots away from her. The protagonist catches it. Instinct. Got it. Barbara smiles and swaps him the round for the pistol. She then places a tray covered in shell casings beside him. The protagonist aims at the target. A shell casing leaps into the gun. He fires, and a bullet hole near the bullseye vanishes. Why does it feel so strange? You're not shooting the bullet. You're catching it. Whoa. The protagonist examines the target. No bullet holes. I've seen this type of ammunition before. In the field? I was almost hit. Well, then you're exceedingly lucky. The protagonist turns to her. An inverted bullet passing through your body would be devastating. The inverse radiation would spread through your body, like polonium poisoning. It's not pretty. The protagonist examines the rounds. These look like today's. They may have been made today, and then inverted years from now. Where did you get them? They came with the wall. I was assigned it, like all the materials I'm studying here. Do you have an analysis of the metals? Sure, why? The mixture of alloys can tell me where it might have been made. Look, I know you said what is my business. Let's not go off topic. I'm not seeing Armageddon here. Barbara takes the round from him and beckons him to follow. The archive. Between tall sets of drawers. A bullet may not seem like much, but it's a simple machine. Lead bullet, brass casing, and gunpowder. If they can invert this, I see no reason they couldn't invert pretty much anything else. Even a nuclear weapon can only affect our future. An inverted weapon might be able to affect our past as well. Barbara stops at a drawer and gestures around herself. Now that we know what to look for, we're finding more and more inverted material. She opens a drawer, revealing a variety of rusted bits and pieces, screws, cracked lenses, metal rods and buttons, remnants of complex objects. The protagonist reaches out and lets a rusted buckle leap into his hand. So what do you think we're seeing? The detritus of a coming war. The protagonist looks around at the multitude of drawers. We cut to a crowded street in Mumbai. The protagonist walks out of an electronics store, opening a new phone, and slips into the throng. He dials. Yep. We live in a twilight world. No friends at dusk. I was told you left the building. Even the dead need allies. Specifically? An assist in Mumbai. To get to Sanjay Singh. Singh? He never leaves his house. And his house? Well, yes, it is. I'm looking at it. Above the bustling street, a high-rise house, at least 20 stories tall, with 2 large balconies. It towers over. "I'll see who's on deck. Bombay Yacht Club, 2 hours." As the protagonist hangs up, he spots a figure on the top balcony, a woman in a sari standing high above the city. The protagonist enters the quiet ex-colonial establishment. He takes a seat. A businessman sits down next to him. "It seems you need an introduction to a prominent Mumbai local on short notice. I'm Neil." Neil offers his hand, and the protagonist takes it. "I need an audience with Sanjay Singh." "Not possible." 10 minutes, tops." "Time isn't the problem. Getting out alive is the problem." He thinks. "Would you take a child hostage?" The protagonist shakes his head. "A woman?" "If I had to. I'm not looking to make much noise here." Neil keeps thinking and signals a waiter. "Vodka tonic." He gestures at the protagonist. "Diet Coke." The protagonist stares at Neil, and Neil looks up confused. "What? You never drink on the job." "You're well informed. It pays to be in our profession." "Well, I prefer club soda." Neil grins. "No, you don't." Neil raps his knuckles on the table, thinking. "How's your parachuting?" "Broken ankle in basic training. Singh's house isn't tall enough to parachute off of." Neil thinks. "But it's bungee jumpable." "I don't think bungee jumpable is a word." "It may not be a word, but it may be our only way out of that place." A thought occurs to him. Or into it, for that matter. Armed guards patrol the balconies of the high-rise house. Inside one of the magnificent rooms, a middle-aged Indian man mixes drinks. This is Sanjay Singh. Neil and the protagonist race across a roof carrying a sports bag. Neil pulls out a winch, and the protagonist pulls out a large catapult, loops it around 2 pipes, glances down onto the walled yard at the foot of the high-rise house. Neil bolts the winch to the roof, and the protagonist sights the upper balcony of the high-rise house, fires a ball with a line up and over the balcony railing. The protagonist and Neil lie next to each other as the winch runs, tensioning their elastic lines. They launch themselves, flying up to land against the side of the building. They run silently up the building, onto the upper terrace, shooting 2 guards with silenced pistols. Sanjay Singh holds a drink to the woman in a sari. They move out onto the balcony. The protagonist surprises Sanjay and holds him at gunpoint. To the woman, "Stay back." To Sanjay, "I was almost taken out by a very unusual type of ammunition in Ukraine. I want to know who supplied it." "My name is Sanjay, and you are?" Silence. "No chit-chat?" The woman pushes a red button on the wall. "There's no one at the other end. No one who's going to help you anyway." An alarm buzzes and security guards are frozen. Neil has a gun on them, a finger to his lips. Sanjay tries to turn to see the protagonist. "Why would I know who supplied it?" The protagonist pushes his head back around with the gun. "The combination of metals is unique to India. If it's from India, it's from you." "A fair assumption." "Deduction." "Deduction, then. Look, my friend, guns are never conducive to a productive negotiation. I'm not the man they send to negotiate." He cocks his weapon and puts the gun to Sanjay's head. "But I am the man to talk to." Sanjay charm curdles. I can't tell you. You're an arms dealer, friend. This may be the easiest trigger I've ever had to pull." "To say anything about a client would violate the tenets he lives by." Protagonist glances at the woman, whose fingers are casually intertwined. The protagonist brings his free hand up to hold the gun in both hands, fingers interlaced. "If tenets are important to you, then you can tell me everything." "Not while you have a gun to my husband's head." The protagonist releases him. "Sanjay, make us a drink." Overlooking the extraordinary bustle of the city, Sanjay has left. His wife hands the protagonist his drink. "I'm Priya Singh." "This is your operation?" A masculine front in a man's world has its uses. The dealer you're looking for is Andrei Sador. The Russian oligarch? You know him. Not personally. He made his billions in gas and moved to London, married an English girl, said to be on the outs with Moscow. Very good, except the gas he made his billions from was actually plutonium, and he's said to be on the outs so he can feed British intelligence whatever the Russians want them to think they know. None of which explains how or why you sold him inverted munitions. When I sold him the rounds, they were perfectly ordinary. So how did he get them inverted? We believe he's functioning as some kind of a broker between our time and the future. He can communicate with the future? We all do. Credit cards, email, text. Anything that goes into the record speaks directly to the future. The question is, can the future speak back? And if so, what are they saying? And I'm supposed to find out. To get anywhere near Sator would take a fresh-faced protagonist. She reaches up to touch his fresh as a daisy. Get close, find out what he's receiving and how. Is it safe to involve British intelligence? I have a contact who's out of Sador's reach. No, but he thinks we're chasing plutonium. Sirens. Bang! Priya looks over to see police cars arriving far below in the walled yard at the foot of her house. You better get out of here. Can't you explain things? You have to start looking at the world in a new way. This conflict runs backwards and forwards simultaneously. Your name on a police report reveals your identity to the future. They pass it back to Sador. My cover's blown before I get near him. You got in. You must have had a plan for getting out. The protagonist pulls a clip and cord from his harness. Not one that I loved. Priya watches him clip onto the balcony rail. Neil flies past, dropping from the balcony above. The protagonist jumps, slowing as he drops behind the wall, out of reach of the police, into a market street, and releases his harness, disappearing into the crowd. We cut to a members' club in London. The protagonist walks down the busy mall and up the steps. He enters and is approached by a steward. Can I help you, sir? I'm Mr. Crosby's lunch. I presume you mean Sir Michael Crosby's lunch. Presume away. If you'll follow me. The protagonist is shown to a table where a distinguished middle-aged man is already eating. Crosby. Started without you. Hope you don't mind. I'll catch up. To the steward. Same for me. I'll send the waiter. No, just pass on the order. Crosby smiles at the protagonist's handling of the steward. I gather you have an interest in a certain Russian national. Anglo-Russian, so I'll have to watch my step. Indeed, he's tapped into the intelligence services. I've warned them he's feeding them rubbish, but they don't seem to care. Tell me about him. I assume you're familiar with the Soviet-era secret cities? Closed cities, not shown on maps, built up around sensitive industries. Most of them have been opened up and renamed as regular towns. Not the one Sator grew up in, Stalsk 12. In the 70s, our people estimated its population at almost 200,000, unacknowledged to this day, thought to be abandoned. Abandoned? Some kind of accident, after which we think it became a site for underground tests. Just 2 weeks ago, same day as the Kiev Opera siege, our satellites detected a detonation in northwest Siberia, about where we think Stalsk 12 was. Nuclear? Big enough to be noticed. Sator emerged from this blank spot on the map with an ambition that eventually led him here, to buy his way into the British establishment, through his wife, Catherine Barton, eldest niece of Sir Frederick Barton. She works at Shipley's, met Sator at an auction. She's into art. Like a lot of wealthy criminals, he thinks if he covers his walls with tasteful, expensive things, it'll distract from the bloodshed. Judging by the lovely girl he married, there might be something in it. Happily married? No, practically estranged. How do I get to Sador? Through her, of course. You may have an inflated idea of my powers of seduction. Hardly. We have an ace in the hole. Crosby slides a shopping bag over to the protagonist's feet. The protagonist looks inside. A small framed drawing. You're carrying a Goya in a Harrods bag? It's a fake, by a Spaniard named Arepo, one of two we confiscated from an embezzler in Bern. We hung on to this one for a rainy day. I felt the first drops when India called. What happened to the other one? A Rubens. It turned up at Shipley's, where it was authenticated by Catherine Barton before going under the hammer. And who do you suppose bought it? Her husband? Does she know it's a forgery? Hard to say. Rumor had it she and Arepo were close. Crosby looks the protagonist over. Look, no offense, but this is a world where someone claiming to be a billionaire gets asked if they're just a dollar billionaire. And Brooks Brothers won't cut it. I'm assuming I have a budget. Crosby tosses him a credit card. Save the world, then we'll balance the books. Can I recommend a tailor? I'll manage. You British don't have a monopoly on snobbery, you know. Not a monopoly, more of a controlling interest. The protagonist rises, taking the credit card and the bag. Thanks for this. By the way, is she a Kate or a Kathy? A cat, I believe. The waiter arrives bearing food, supervised by the steward. Could you box that for me? Certainly not. The protagonist smiles at Crosby, who nods a goodbye. Goodbye, Sir Michael. We cut to a West London private school. Mothers stand at the railings waiting for their kids. One of them, a smart young woman, stands a little apart from the group. School kids pile out of the school. The protagonist watches from across the road as the young woman spots her son. She offers him her hand, but he reaches up to take his nanny's. She moves her hand to pick something off his jumper, before he's put in the back of a black Range Rover with tinted windows. The protagonist watches the young woman wave at the departing car, carrying her child, utterly alone. A Bentley pulls up to Shipley's. A doorman opens the rear door. The protagonist emerges, immaculately tailored, holding a beautiful leather briefcase. The protagonist is approached by a representative. How can I help, sir? I have an appraisal with Miss Barton. Tell Kat her client is in the fallow room. The protagonist admires the paintings on the wall of the appraisal room. The door opens, and the young woman from the school gate comes in, dressed for business. This is Kat Barton. She looks bemused, but gives him a genuine and friendly smile. I'm sorry, I wasn't notified of any appointments, Mr. Goya? Mr. Goya? The protagonist opens his briefcase. No, I'm told you're the person to see about... He offers the drawing to her. Goya. She takes it, suddenly interested. Wow, it's extraordinary. She lays the drawing on the table and grabs a loupe. What's it worth? Let's not get ahead of ourselves. There's a lot of work before any kind of valuation. Provenance, microscopic examination, x-rays. She's bent over the table, peering through the loupe. The protagonist studies her reaction as he... But what does your heart tell you? She steps back. Something about the drawing bothers her. I'm sorry, where did you say you acquired this drawing? Tomás Arepo. Kat rises and turns to face the protagonist, cold. What do you want? What I want is complicated. Do you work for my husband? I've never met your husband. That's the reason I'm here. Is there somewhere we can talk? In London? Not really. The protagonist and Kat sit at a corner table in a restaurant. I bought my Goya for cents on the dollar from an irate Swiss banker, traced it to a repo, and realized I'd scored a bargain when he told me who'd paid top dollar for another one of his pictures. Your husband. Where's the bargain? Your drawing's an obvious fake. My drawing is a very good fake. You know that better than anyone. The information is the bargain. The information that I helped defraud my own husband. He and I are in related businesses, but he's a hard man to meet. If you and I were to make an arrangement. Arrangement? You mean blackmail? Don't be afraid of the word. My husband isn't. I'm sorry to tell you he got there first. He knows? And he's never done anything about it? Why would he? He paid $9 million, which would barely cover the holiday he just forced us on. Where did you go, Mars? Vietnam. On our yacht. Well, his yacht. Kat looks the protagonist up and down. You've got the suit, the shoes, and the watch, but I think you're a little out of your depth. People who've amassed fortunes like your husband aren't generally okay with being cheated out of any of it. Kat sips her wine, wanting to talk, but knowing she shouldn't. The drawing is his hold over me. He's threatened me with the police, prison, the works. He controls me. My contact with my son, everything. Leaving him would have never been easy. Now it's impossible. My life, you can't fight, just beg. Or worse. In Vietnam, I tried to love him again. If there were still love, he might give me my son. We sat on that bloody boat and watched the sunsets, imitating an earlier time. He seemed happy, so I asked, and he made me an offer. To let me go if I agreed to never see my son again. I expressed myself. We cut to an insert, a crystal bowl of raspberries smashed on the polished wood of a yacht's deck. Then took Max ashore. He called us contrite, but when we came back... Kat and Max on a launch. Kat follows Max's gaze to see a female figure slide into the water. I glimpsed some other woman diving off the boat, and then he'd vanished. I've never felt such envy. You don't seem the jealous type. Of her. You know how I dream of just diving off that boat? Of freedom? But you share a son, and that's my life. Did you know the drawing was a fake? The authentication took months. Arepo and I became close, maybe too close. Maybe my judgment was clouded. I failed. But Andre can't conceive of failure, only betrayal. I didn't betray my husband. In retrospect, maybe I missed my chance. And he let Arepo walk free? If you'd actually met Arepo as you'd claimed, you'd understand that he no longer walks anywhere. We spoke on the phone. He can't do that either. The protagonist considers this. Where's the drawing? Why? Get me the introduction. I'll take the drawing out of the equation. No picture, no prosecution. No hold over you. Kat looks at the protagonist, not daring to hope. I might just be your second chance. She snaps. I don't need redemption. At betrayal. A large, well-dressed thug sits down at the table. He takes a green bean from the protagonist's plate and chews it vacantly. This is Volkov. The protagonist looks at Kat. Friends of your husband? She nods. You knew this would happen. They won't kill you. Andre dislikes tangling with local law enforcement on that level. You must really not have liked the look of me. Kat, rising. The look of you is fine. It's better to get to the nasty part before I care one way or the other. He takes her hand, pulls her forward to kiss her cheek. Protagonist whispers. There's a number in your left coat pocket. Don't call from home. A thug puts a meaty hand on the protagonist's shoulder. You won't be taking my call. I might surprise you. She leaves, breezing out through the kitchen. At Volkov's nod, two thugs escort the protagonist from his chair, heading toward the kitchen. A waiter moves to object. Volkov, eating the protagonist's leftovers, pulls the waiter up short, shaking his head. Kat exits the restaurant in the alley behind, distraught, walking past a waiting thug then sliding into the back seat of a Mercedes. The driver is a gaunt Russian. "Please, let's go." The gaunt Russian does not react, but watches through the rearview mirror as a thug enters the kitchen. "Can we get going?" The protagonist enters the kitchen, followed by the two thugs. Chefs and busboys retreat as the other thug approaches. Kat turns from the window. "Please!" "He wants you to see." The protagonist jackknifes his lower leg up into the crotch of the thug behind him, spins him into the thug next to him, pots and pans flying. Volkov wipes sauce with bread, enjoying noises from the kitchen. The third thug swings, the protagonist dodges, takes the blow on the shoulder, slams his head into the third thug's neck, leaving him gasping. The protagonist grabs the third thug, racing for the window. Kat flinches as, with a crash of plates, a body tumbles down the stairs. And he gets what he wants. Then she sees something else. The protagonist exits. Not always, apparently. The protagonist brushes himself clean and spots the Mercedes. He starts moving towards it. The gaunt Russian scrambles to get the car moving. Kat looks back at the protagonist as the car roars away. At the school gates, Kat is crouched, talking to her son, Max. The nanny hovers. "Anna says we're going to Pompeii to see lava." "We'll go together. I'll be there too." Max looks up at the nanny. Kat hugs him tight. The nanny taps Kat on the shoulder. Kat smiles at her son, tears in her eyes, as the car pulls away. She pulls out her phone, dials, hears a ringtone behind her. The protagonist is there. "I said I'd surprise you. He's a cute kid." "Max, he's everything." "Where's the drawing?" "Oslo, at the airport." "The airport?" We insert a cut. A Rotas car drives across an airport apron and down a ramp. "Do you know what a freeport is?" "A storage facility for art that's been acquired." Into a sleek facility, the Oslo Freeport, as a staff member stands ready to greet a new client. "And not yet taxed. We started a network. Rotas. His construction company built them. I brought in clients. The facilities are tax havens." The client is Neil. He takes in the security arrangements. The clients can view their investments. The protagonist is standing on the roof of the Oslo Opera House, briefing Neil. Without importing them, so they avoid paying tax. Sort of a transit lounge for art. We go back to Kat on the street, briefing the protagonist. "Art, antiques, anything of value, really." "Anything?" "Anything legal." Then back to the protagonist, briefing Neil. "But it's not unlike the Swiss banking system. Opaque." Back to Kat. "Rotas has assets in Oslo Freeport. I'm guessing it's there." "Guessing?" Back to Oslo. "Guessing?" Back to Kat. "We make trips there 4 or 5 times a year." "To view art?" "And whatever he does. Turns out art is of no importance to Andre." "But the Freeports are." Kat nods. A staff member brings Neil into a luxurious gallery. "Some Freeports are just warehouses here. You can actually enjoy your possessions." Then through the doors into an angled inner corridor. "The structure of the vaults is based on the Pentagon. Each vault a separate structure within the others. Damage to one structure won't compromise the others." They arrive at a door in the corridor. The staff member uses his thumb to unlock a door. "Clients have biometric access straight in off the tarmac." "From the terminal?" The staff member, confused. "From their private planes." "Of course." Neil checks the locks as the staff member opens the door into a vast shipping area filled with shipping containers. "Our logistics department ships to and from other freeports without customs inspection." Neil notices Rotas containers marked for delivery to Tallinn. "What are you hoping to find?" You really want to know? I'm not sure. Bring some lead-lined gloves. Jesus, nuclear? When you're on the tour... Neil is shown back into one of the vaults. Pay attention to the fire precaution. Documents are vulnerable to... fire, absolutely. I was going to say water damage from sprinkler systems. We don't use sprinklers. He points to vents. The facility is flooded with halide gas, displacing all the air within seconds. Can you show me? If I did, we'd suffocate. What about the staff in here? Halide only fills the vaults. They just have to get into the corridor. There's a 10-second warning. You only give them 10 seconds? Our clients use us because we have no priorities above their property. Blimey. Well, sir, you asked. The protagonist and Neil walk through the Oslo airport terminal. Vault doors are fireproof, hydraulic closes, simple key and electronic triggers, surprisingly easy once there's a lockdown. Why a lockdown? Power switches to failsafe, sealing outer doors, but inner doors revert to factory settings and pickable locks. Child's play, really. Child's play? They're inside airport security. They have to worry about climate control, not armed raids. So how do we get firepower through a perimeter to trigger a lockdown? The protagonist and Neil look across the tarmac to the Freeport structure. Back wall of the Freeport. The protagonist notices Neil start to smile. You got something? You're not going to like it. The protagonist looks at Neil in disbelief. You want to crash a plane? No, not from the air. Don't be so dramatic. I want to run a jet off the taxiway, breach the rear wall, start a fire. How big a plane? Well, that part is a little dramatic. They approach a man sitting on a harbor front bench. This is Mahir. His team will work the plane. There can't be passengers. Norsk Freight, they use the hangar on the west side of Freeport. You want to crash a transport plane? What about the crew? We'll pop the slides, chuck 'em off. On the move? What's the problem? They'll be fine. It seems bold. Bold I'm fine with, he smiles. I thought you were going to say nuts. And if we get caught? We won't. If you do. Everyone assumes terrorism, but no one's died. Swift extradition, then lost in the system. It'll barely make the news. That may depend on the size of your explosion. Actually, the gold bars might get some play. Gold bars? Norsk Freight ships treasury gold once a month. We blow the back, drop the gold out on the runway. No one is going to be looking at your building, I guarantee you. Neil takes lungfuls of air at the hotel room in Oslo, hyperventilating. Mahir starts a stopwatch. The protagonist studies some plans. The space at the center of the Pentagon is too big. There's something there that's not marked. Neil runs out of air. Mahir checks his watch. A vault within a vault? Maybe. 85 seconds. Ample. Won't you be running? He turns to the protagonist. Start packing. The protagonist starts breathing hard. Protagonist and Neil carrying briefcases in the Freeport at night. They head inside. Two workers, Mahir and his associate, Rohan, back up a meal truck onto the transport plane. They lift the cargo until it's level with the front side door. The protagonist follows Neil through security. Their briefcases are examined, finding framed documents. Mahir and Rohan carry crude meals through the door into the galley, where they stack them into the catering units, supervised by a guard. The staff member brings Neil an espresso. The protagonist subtly checks his watch. Mahir points past the guard. You gonna eat that? The guard turns and Mahir grabs him from behind. Rohan stuffs a cotton pad over the guard's face, rendering him unconscious. They roll him into the catering truck lift. Mahir pops out and signals another guard. 3 guards have been dumped into the truck lift. Rohan sends it down and seals the plane door. Mahir approaches the cockpit as the pilots perform checks, showing them his gun. All right, lads. The staff member leads Neil and the protagonist into the vaults. At gunpoint, the pilots nervously pull back from the hangar. Rohan checks the stacks of gold bars secured in the rear. The plane is towed back onto the taxiway and lifts its engines, easing forward. Rohan slashes the restraining straps in the transport plane and crouches behind the pile of gold. He pulls out a grenade and grabs the nearest gold bar, stuffing it into his waistband before pulling the pin. The staff member shows Neil and the protagonist into a vault. Neil puts down his briefcase and pulls out the framed documents. The transport plane barrels down the taxiway. Rohan tosses the grenade behind the gold at the tail of the plane and ducks as it blows. Blasting a hole in the rear of the plane, gold bars pour out, clattering across the tarmac. Hearing the distant explosion, the protagonist and Neil start packing air. The staff member stares at them, quizzical. Neil, between breaths, "Yoga." Mahir forces the pilots from their seats. The inflatable slide bursts open, dragging on the asphalt, as the pilots roll onto it, scrambling down to the ground and rolling away from the giant plane. Mahir turns the stick hard left, aiming at the rear wall of the freeport. Rohan lowers a ladder behind the forward landing gear. He and Mahir climb down. Mahir and Rohan jump down onto the asphalt, racing back between the wheels as the giant plane smashes into the brick wall of the freeport, erupting in a massive explosion. The vault is rocked by the explosion. Alarms scream. Doors start closing. Neil looks panicked at the staff member. 10 seconds, right? The staff member bolts, pushing past them. They take a last gulp of air and gas hisses in. They pull apart the frames of the documents, breaking them into lock-picking apparatus. Lock picks a small crowbar. They go to work on the inner door, prying open a panel and hot-wiring it. The door slides up. They burst into the corridor, gasping. The door slams down behind them. They hustle down to the next vault door and get to work. The door opens. They gulp air and then race inside. Round the corner, past racks, crates, some are broken. Stop at the next door. The protagonist picks the lock. His pick breaks. Neil bolts back to where they entered. The protagonist struggles, pulling out pieces of the pick. Neil gets to the first door. There's no handle. The protagonist uses a different tool. Neil smashes the door. In full-blown panic, he looks to the end of the vault where the roller door is broken at the bottom, halide gas hissing out. Neil races towards it. The protagonist gets his door open. Neil stumbles past. The protagonist drags him through the door. They lie gasping on the inner corridor. Neil hears something, looks around. Neil, in an urgent whisper, "There's someone in here with us." The protagonist is up, moving down the corridor. They arrive at 2 doors, side by side. The Rotas vault. They each work on a door. Neil opens. "Need a hand?" The protagonist works his door, but nothing. Actually, yes. Neil leans over and hits enter. The door opens. The protagonist enters a room, one side of which is a long glass window. Neil is on the other side of the glass, in an identical room. There are bullet holes in the glass. At each end of the room is a tube, like a sealed-in revolving door. The protagonist's feet crunch broken glass. Neil examines bullet holes in the wall opposite the glass. Wisps of smoke gather near the holes. Neil reaches up. "Don't touch them." What the hell happened here? The protagonist sees a stripped automatic pistol on the floor. He picks it up, thinking, "It hasn't happened yet." Neil looks up at the protagonist, quizzical. A loud hum starts up from the revolving door. The protagonist looks down, movement beneath his feet. The debris. Smoke gathers. The revolving doors rotate, opening. A black-clad figure in a gas mask leaps backward from the tube, reaching behind itself to grab the stripped automatic in the protagonist's hand. On Neil's side, an identical black-clad figure leaps out and forward, knocks Neil over, moving for the vault door. A slide jumps into the backwards figure's hand. He reassembles the gun in the protagonist's hand, a magazine jumping up to load it, and then blam! A bullet is sucked out of the wall and through the glass, healing the bullet holes. The protagonist struggles with the backwards figure, whose reverse movements seem alien and impossible. Neil gives chase, racing out of the vault door. The backwards figure pulls the protagonist sideways, lining up his head with the next bullet hole. Blam! Glass flies up as the shot just misses the protagonist's head. Neil chases the forwards figure down the corridor. The protagonist struggles. The backwards figure pushes him toward the next bullet hole. Strange reverse groaning building in its throat, behind the black gas mask, the groan peaking as the protagonist takes his pick and stabs the backward figure in the arm, smacks the figure's gun out of its hand. It bounces out the door. The figure rises into the protagonist's arms and pulls him backwards. We can't tell if it's pushing or the protagonist is pulling as they move backward through the door. The figure pushes and pulls the protagonist down the corridor. Neil races around a corner, grabs the figure's mask, which comes off. He looks surprised at the figure's face, which we cannot see, and then turns, racing back the way he came. The protagonist and the backwards figure struggle into Vault 2. They smash into the racks and crates. The protagonist grabs the gun and raises it to the figure's head. "No! Don't kill him!" The protagonist freezes. Neil steps up, desperate. "We need to know if you're compromised." The protagonist throws the figure to the ground. "Why are you here?" The protagonist tries to rip off the gas mask, but it is strapped tight. The reverse keening gets louder and louder. The protagonist steps onto the figure's injured arm. "Who sent you?" The figure's reverse screaming gets louder. The protagonist kicks its arm hard again and again. "How did you know we'd be here?" A boom from outside. Air starts blowing across the backward figure, sucking underneath the broken roller door. The backward figure slides impossibly across the floor underneath the door, which slams shut, unbroken behind him. The protagonist and Neil look at each other. "We have to go." One of the plane's jet engines has come loose, still thrusting, swinging around, creating havoc for the emergency services. The ambulance skids sideways, avoiding the thrust. Mahir and Rohan stand at a distance, watching the mayhem along with dozens of other uniformed airport workers. EMTs race in past the staff members. Neil moves to the other door and works the lock. Sirens around. "What happened to the other guy?" "I took care of him." The door opens and they slip into the outer vault. They assemble the document frames and then lie down unconscious. Energy services burst in. We cut to a hotel room. Neil hangs up his phone. "Mahir and Rohan slipped out clean." He turns to the protagonist. "I've seen too much and I'm still alive, which means you've decided to trust me. Or I've just lost my edge." "Ah, your edge is intact." The protagonist looks at Neil. There's a Cold War. Nuclear? Temporal. Neil, skeptical. Time travel? No. Technology that can invert an object's entropy. You mean reverse chronology, like Feynman and Wheeler's notion that a positron is an electron moving backwards in time? Sure, that's exactly what I meant. I've got a master's in physics. Well, try to keep up. The implications of this are beyond secret. Then why did you take me in? I thought we'd find the drawing and a couple boxes of bullets. You were surprised as I was? I'm going back to Mumbai for answers. I'll set you up as go-between. But remember, to you, all this is about plutonium. Or when you're done, they'll kill you. Won't you have to anyway? I'd rather it was my decision. So would I think. The protagonist boards a ferry boat, approaching Priya at the rail. I don't like to leave my house. And I don't like bungee jumping, but we need to talk. What about? Inversion. We spoke about it. I don't remember anything about people being inverted. We're trying to do with inversion what we couldn't do with the atomic bomb. Uninvent it. Divide and contain the knowledge. Ignorance is our ammunition. The more any one of us knows, the greater the risk that we're actually making the situation worse. Risk more. Priya gestures at the paper. The headline, Oslo Gold Freight Crash, Terrorism, Robbery, or Both. Your work? The protagonist nods. What did you find in the vaults? 2 antagonists, 1 inverted. We took out the regular one, the inverted one got away. Both emerged at the same moment. Yeah, they were the same person. You saw someone re-inverting. Sator's built a turnstile in that vault. Turnstile? A machine for inverting. You told me that technology hasn't been invented yet. It hasn't. He's been given it by the future. For what? You've the best chance of finding out. They walk with bodyguards at a discreet distance. Have you met him? I was close. Get closer. I've been compromised. Unless that antagonist was a coincidence. The wife set you up? Maybe. There's a good chance I get killed as soon as I go back in. This was always a suicide mission. That's why they recruited a corpse. Who did? Who are we working for? Everyone. Survival. We need more. Consider yourself working for me. Well, boss, I need a way to succeed. Priya thinks and looks at the protagonist, deciding. What if I have something he needs? Such as plutonium-241. Sador tried to lift the only loose 241 from under the CIA team at the opera siege in Kiev. He got the team, but not the 241. Who did? Ukrainian security services. It's moving through Tallinn in a week. Helping an arms dealer steal weapons-grade plutonium is unacceptable. I'm just going to take him out. No, Sador has to stay alive until we know his part in things. Leverage the situation without losing control of the 241. It's too dangerous. A terrorist's bomb, even one that kills millions, is nothing compared to what happens if we don't stop Sador. From doing what? Priya looks up at the road at the cars streaming past. We're being attacked. Not by terrorists or rogue states. Who then? We're being attacked by the future, and we're fighting over time. Time? Theirs is running out, so they're coming for ours, and Sador is helping. You have to find out how. We cut to a terrace on the Amalfi coast. The protagonist leaves the tourists behind, heading down a leafy path to emerge at a terrace overlooking the sea. Kat stands there alone. The protagonist falls in beside her. I saw the news from Oslo. Do you have the drawings? You don't have to worry about it anymore. You destroyed it? I don't think you'd want it back. Does he know? Not yet, so sit tight. Sit tight? Why? Every day my son spends with that monster, he thinks a little less of me. It won't be long. In the meantime, introduce me. As what? I'm a former first secretary from the American Embassy in Riyadh. We met at a party last June. We were at a party in Riyadh, but I don't think it was June. June 29th, 7 for 7:30. Salmon for the printed menu swapped for sea bass on the night. Sador left early, that's when we met. Don't offer any of this, it's there if he asks. I came into Shipley's in London. You ran into me here and wanted to show me the yacht. He'll think we're having an affair. And he'll want to meet me. Or have you killed? Let me worry about that. Did I look worried? The protagonist and Kat look out at an enormous yacht. Sleep 70 with crew, 4 tenders, 2 helicopters, missile defenses. Jesus, worried about pirates? Andre loves playing one government off another. The day they turn, that's his refuge. What if I joined you? She nods at Volkov, holding the launch's line. I'm not sure Volkov's taking passengers just now. Then let's just take mine. The protagonist nods at Volkov as they walk past. The protagonist guns his boat hard, carving a glittering path across the calm harbor. Kat sits, enjoying the speed. The protagonist pulls up alongside the yacht. Crew members scramble, unaccustomed to unauthorized approaches. The protagonist follows Kat's gaze to a figure above. The sun is behind it. Kat steps out onto the yacht. The protagonist gives the figure a jaunty salute. No response. The protagonist zips back toward shore, passing the yacht's launch. He waves at Volkov. We follow Kat into the enormous lounge. She drops her bags. Who's the American? She turns. A middle-aged man with cold eyes and a thin beard stands in the doorway. This is Sador. A friend. The man from Shipley's, who you tried to have beaten up. I ask again, who is he? We met in Riyadh in June at the American Embassy. Good with fists for a diplomat. Paranoia's your department. He seems nice. I invited him to dinner. She turns away. Max! Max! He's visiting Pompeii and Herculaneum. Overnight? You just sent him off? He's my son. Our son. I told you I'd go with him. I explained you were busy with your friend. He turns and walks away. She watches him leave. The protagonist walks toward a table where Sador, holding court, attacks some crabs. Volkov stops the protagonist and frisks him in full view of the diners. Where I'm from, you buy me dinner first. Without looking, Sador gestures at a seat and Volkov lets the protagonist pass. He sits. Mr. Sador, I'm... Don't bother. Just tell me if you've slept with my wife yet. The protagonist glances up at Kat opposite, chatting. No, not yet. A glance from Sador between buttery mouthfuls of crab. How would you like to die? Old. You chose the wrong profession. Sador returns a toast from a grinning guest and reaches a greasy palm to the protagonist's cheek, as if in friendliness. There's a walled garden up the road. We're going to take you there, cut your throat, not across, in the middle like a hole. Then we'll take your balls and stuff them in the cut and block the windpipe. Complex. It's gratifying to watch a man you don't like trying to pull his own balls out of his throat before he chokes. Is this how you treat all your guests? The ones using my family to get to me. How else is someone supposed to get to you? Only a fool wants to be near me. Or someone who has something worth delaying your gratification for. Sador signals Volkov. Kat glances over as Volkov rises. We're finished. Do you like opera? At this, Sador pauses and waves off Volkov. Not here. You sail? I've messed around on boats. Be at the dock at 8, ready to do more than mess around. Kat, relieved, watches the protagonist leave. Kat enters, dressed in sailing gear. Sador is already seated, similarly dressed, reading his phone with a cup of coffee. Max has missed too much school this year. I'm taking him back to England. No, you're not. He has a tutor here. The school won't be okay with... Yes, they will. Can I finish? Look around you. He has everything he needs here. A servant places a plate with a silver cover in front of Kat, then pours her coffee. I don't care what he needs. You bought the trappings of a king, but we both know you're a grubby little man playing power games with a wife who doesn't love him anymore. Sador looks at her. You seem spirited today. Kat, defiant. Do I? Sador barely nods at the servant who pulls off the lid. Yes, you do. On the plate, instead of breakfast, is a small drawing. A Rubens. Kat freezes. Were you worried it had been destroyed? Rest assured, instinct told me to remove it from the vault. I've always had instincts about the future. That's how I built this life you no longer value. Kat looks up at him, not knowing what to say or do. The protagonist stands on the dock, dressed for sailing, watching the launch approach. Morning. As he gets on, Kat ignores him, and Sador enjoys this. The protagonist tries to catch Kat's eye, but she will not look his way. Sador hands the protagonist a harness and a helmet. He looks at them, taken aback, and then looks ahead toward two graphite-dark, highest-tech America's Cup sailing yachts, trimmed and ready. Impressed. When you said sailing, Kat gets on, followed by Sador and the protagonist. The rigging crew departs. Kat checks the sheets and winches. Sador indicates the harness. You know how? Aye, Captain. Sador gestures at Kat. She's Captain. The boats fly, skimming the water on their hydrofoils. Sador and the protagonist are next to each other, standing on one pontoon, leaning out on their harnesses. Kat is at the wheel, concentrating. What do you know about opera? In 2008, a remote Russian missile station was overwhelmed and held for a week. When the station was retaken, plutonium-241 on one warhead was 3/4 of a kilo lighter. The missing 241 surfaced at the Opera House siege in Kiev on the 14th. You're well informed, but that doesn't mean you have the plutonium. I didn't say I had it. I'm saying I know how to get it. Coming about! Kat swings the boat into the wind, sail flapping furiously. As the wind catches it from the other side, Sador and the protagonist duck under the boom, racing to the other side, their harnesses snapping taut as they lean out. What do you propose? Partnership. I wouldn't partner with you. Kat works the wheel, tracking the other boat. Her look is one of bottled rage. What's wrong with me? You know how to handle yourself. You have no record. Someone in the arms trade with training who covers his tracks? Not that shocking. For an intelligence agent. Sador holds the protagonist's gaze. Secure your jib line. The protagonist turns and Kat leans into Sador. Burn in hell, Andre. She yanks his quick release and he flies off the boat, smashing headfirst into the waves. The protagonist sees Sador face down unconscious. He unclips and jumps to the wheel, spinning the boat off the wind. You can't jibe a boat like this! The protagonist steers the boat across the wind, snapping the boom across, almost losing the mast. You can if you have to. He raises the sheets, spilling wind and losing speed. As they pass Sador, he dives into the water and grabs the oligarch, pulls his face out of the water. Sador starts coughing. The protagonist dries himself later in a stateroom of Sador's yacht. The door opens and Kat bursts in. Why didn't you let him drown? She's on him, smashing her fists into his chest. I need him. To sell guns? I'm not who you think I am. That I know. He showed me the drawing. I'm sorry. Do you have any idea what you've done? I had to get close to him. I don't know what you think your husband is. We both know he's an arms dealer. He's so much more. What then? Andre Sador holds all our lives in his hands, not just yours. She looks bemused. A knock at the door. She hides behind it. Mr. Sador wants to see you. The protagonist nods and pushes the door. Volkov stops it. Now! He wants to see me without pants? Volkov lets the door shut. The protagonist turns to Kat. Trust me. Save it. I'm not falling for it twice. The protagonist looks at Kat and sighs. You have a better option? She looks into the protagonist's eyes, assessing. Whatever it takes to get what you want, just like him. Not a second's thought about me or my son. What do you think he's going to do to me now? He pulls a gun from his bag and offers it to her. Try not to use this. She takes it. and lets it point at him. On anyone. The protagonist is shown into Sador's study. Sador is sitting behind his desk. A doctor is taking his blood pressure. Enough! Sador rips the cuff off his arm, sending the doctor out. He checks a fitness tracker on his wrist. See, pulse of a man half my age. Drink with me. Sador pours them both tumblers of vodka. It seems I now owe you my life. It's nothing. Sador fixes his black gaze on the protagonist. My life is not nothing, and I don't like to be in debt. Then pay me. No retribution against your wife. A dangerous beat, and then Sador grins. You think she released my harness? It was my own mistake. Then help me steal the 241. I need resources. It's weapons-grade plutonium. That means special handling, containment facilities. I know what it means. You lecture me about radiation. Andrei Sator, digging plutonium from the rubble of my city as a teenager. Where? Stalsk 12, my home. Sador sips his drink and looks the protagonist in the eye. One pod of a warhead exploded at ground level, scattering the others. They needed people to find the plutonium. We insert a cut in a desolate street. Snow falling on a hazmat-suited scavenger. A young Sador walking in front of a massive mining machine, carrying a giant crowbar and a Geiger counter. It became my first contract. Nobody else even bid. They thought it was a death sentence. Young Sador spots the machine unearthing a large metal capsule. A fellow worker sees the same thing. But one man's probability of death is another man's possibility for a life. The young Sador opens the capsule. He lifts out some papers which have his name on them, revealing gold bars underneath. The fellow worker leans in, studying the gold. They make eye contact, and Sador strikes the fellow worker with his crowbar, killing him. I staked my claim in the new Russia. Even now my company is the only one to operate in the ruins. The 241's being transported through northern Europe on its way to a long-term nuclear storage depot at Trist. I'm told you have resources in Tallinn. Sador downs his vodka. Stay with us tonight, I insist. Kat slips the gun under her mattress and feels the lump. She pulls it out, moves to the desk, and puts it in her jewelry case. She hears a noise. She jumps onto the bed, picks up a book. The door opens. It's Sador. He locks the door. What do you want, Andrei? We're going to talk about today. No, we're not. He removes a diamond cufflink. No? Kat starts to get off the bed. Don't you think for a minute you can treat me the way you treat your other women? Sador shifts to lean on the desk, cutting her off from the jewelry box. She sits back down. He removes his belt. And how do you imagine I treat these other women? Sador slips the cufflink through a belt hole. You think I force them into conversation? Sador tests the diamond-studded belt against his palm. You want to be quiet? Fine. He tosses her a pillow. Bite down on that. Sador moves towards her. She looks at the jewelry box on the desk, but no way around him. Sador looks down at her. She looks up in his cold eyes. Even a soul as blank and brittle as yours needs a response. Is fear and pain enough? Because that's all I have to offer. Then it'll have to do. Why didn't you just throw me out? If I can't have you, no one can. At what point do you give up and kill me? Sador shrugs and wraps the belt a turn around his fist. Turn over. Touch me, I scream so loud he hears. You think I'd let him interfere? If he tried, you'll have to kill him. End of deal. So leave me the fuck alone. A knock at the door. Not now! He hears a rumbling. Sador, without a word, exits. Sador grabs binoculars from one of his men, peering out. A helicopter emerges from the darkness, thundering in. The protagonist listens to the incoming chopper from his stateroom, pulls on a black windbreaker, and quietly opens his door. The protagonist makes his way looking for an exit. The chopper descends to the landing pad, rotors turning, as Sador signals his men to head in. The protagonist is on a roof overlooking the helipad. He watches Sador's men remove a large grubby capsule and take it below as the chopper lifts off. The protagonist makes his way through the storage area. Peering through a window, he sees crew gathered around the capsule. Sador enters and wipes dirt from the latches, then opens it. Sador puts his hand over the open capsule, letting small flat gold bars leap from the capsule into his hand. He looks up expectantly. The crew shoves a crew member forward onto his knees. Eyes downcast, he reaches behind and pulls a gold bar from his rear pocket. He offers it to Sador with trembling hands. Sador takes it, eyes never leaving the crew member, who finally and tentatively looks up. Sador jabs him in the mouth with the gold bar. Bam! Then smashes him over the head. The protagonist is repulsed by what he sees. Sador steps back breathless from the small crew member who lies motionless on the ground. As Sador raises his wrists to check his fitness tracker, blood drips from the gold bar in his hand. 98. Not bad for such exertion. The protagonist senses, turns, crack. Volkov smashes his jaw and kicks him in the ribs. Pistol whips him. The protagonist, now bleeding, is shoved into the engine room. He was at the window. Sador looks at the protagonist, who nods at the capsule. I was curious. My property shouldn't concern you. Who are you? How do you come by your information about the opera? Do I work for intelligence services? Several, just like you. You wouldn't do business with someone who wasn't savvy enough to be recruited. Hell, the CIA provides 2/3 of the market for fissile material. They're usually buying, not selling. But we do live in a twilight world. Is that Whitman? It's pretty. Next warning's a bullet in your brain. No balls in my throat? There will be no time for such things in Tallinn. Sador gestures to his men and they lift the capsule. The protagonist spots dried mud from the latches on the table. Make your way there. I want Volkov on the team. The protagonist struggles to his feet. No, I spring the materials, you pay me off. Your wife does the exchange. I never involve her in my business. That's why I trust her. Sador to Volkov. Put him ashore. How do I contact you? You don't. How do you advance me the funds? Sador tosses the protagonist the bloody gold bar. The protagonist fumbles it onto the table, and Volkov sneers. Handle the plutonium better than that. The protagonist, looking Volkov in the eye, picks up the gold bar, scooping dried mud into his hand unseen. We cut to the protagonist, who walks down the crowded streets of Tallinn with Neil. What did you find on the gold? 300,000 at today's price. No francs, mold marks, nothing. It's like it came from outer space. Or the future. How? Dead drops. He buries his time capsule, transmits the location, and then digs it up to collect whatever inverted material they sent. Instantaneous. Where does he bury it? Someplace that won't be disturbed for centuries. What did the soil sample show? Northern Europe or Asia? Radioactive. Dried blood was European. Pretty broad. This is the start of the run. The protagonist looks back where they came and then up ahead. When does the material arrive? Thursday. When does Sator arrive? I don't know, but he'll be here. Cargo's in a reinforced truck. Nuclear police front and back. SUV with serious armor. You can't break in through the windows. And they can't break out. I don't follow. You will. So, light convoy through downtown. What's the thinking? A crowded, unpredictable traffic pattern makes planning an ambush almost impossible. The protagonist looks down at the congestion. They have a point. Is the convoy monitored from the air? No, tracked by GPS. A wrong turn or unscheduled stop, in comes the cavalry. Neil and protagonist hop a tram. The protagonist studies the journey along the multi-lane road out of town. We need big guns. Guns that make the point without being fired. We need a fast car that doesn't look fast, and 4 heavy vehicles, all different. Bus, coach, 18-wheeler. Neil nods. One of them has to be a fire truck. Neil looks up, interested. Most of all, we need to set this up with nothing in the record. Nothing electronic, nothing paper. I don't want Sador ambushing us the second we spring the material. His ignorance is our only protection. Inside a Mercedes on Tallinn streets, Kat sits beside Sador in the back, staring out the window. Everything salvaged from Oslo has been shipped here. Why am I here? I don't trust anyone else to assess the pieces. The Mercedes pulls into the Tallinn Freeport. Several bodyguards emerge. Sador heads inside. Kat follows, looking through a metal fence. An Audi sits there idling, its driver wearing an oxygen mask. Kat enters. Sador is at a table covered in weapons. See, Kat, some of my favorites. He picks up a machine gun. Singed, but salvageable, wouldn't you say? She stares at the weaponry as if she's never seen anything like it before. It's not my area of expertise. That's right, you never have anything to do with such things. But this is where our worlds collide. Andre, what is this? You know perfectly well what it is, Kat. The filthy business that put these clothes on your back and our boy in his school. That you thought you could negotiate your way around. Volkov in Russian subtitled. The convoy due downtown in 10. Sador checks his watch and nods at Volkov. Turns to Kat. It's time to go. I'm not going anywhere with you. Sador slams the machine gun down on the table. Kat flinches. Sador turns enraged. Look at me and understand. You don't negotiate with a tiger. You admire a tiger until it turns on you and you feel its true fucking nature. Sador moves toward her and Kat pulls out a gun. Don't! On a Tallinn street, a large unmarked truck with an escort front and back makes its stops and starts way through the downtown traffic. The protagonist and Neil watch the convoy cross an intersection and then pull forward, squeezing through traffic to get ahead. Neil raises a walkie-talkie. A co-pilot. Green, 2 minutes. The green driver nods at the green co-pilot who holds the radio. Check. He puts the radio down and pulls out a large automatic rifle. The protagonist checks his watch and Neil speaks into the radio. Yellow, 60 seconds. Over the radio. 60. Check. Blue, 45 seconds. 45. Check. Red, on our way to you. The red driver and red co-pilot are dressed as firefighters. The BMW pulls out, running behind the nuclear convoy. As the convoy passes the cross street where the green truck, a flatbed, is sitting, it pulls out beside them, settling in to the right of the convoy. Sador steps toward Kat back in the storage facility. Stay right there. She lifts the gun, intent. You wouldn't kill me. I already tried. You pushed me off the boat. You're not gonna shoot me in cold blood. My blood is not cold, Andre. No, but you're not angry enough. Sador edges toward Kat. Because anger scars over into despair. I look in your eyes. He casually gestures at her. I see despair. He smacks the gun out of her hand and punches her. She drops. Vengeful bitch, living off me, pretending to be better. With a primal animal viciousness, Sador spits at Kat. Enough! Sador kicks her once in the side. You wanted to know when it's better to kill you? You'll have your answer. He motions to Volkov, who with a guard lifts Kat and carries her toward the door. Sador puts an earpiece in his ear. Tell me everything as it happens. Volkov nods, leaving. Sador walks through a large door. Silas is this side. As the door shuts behind him, he walks toward a red door with a small porthole, finding a spot in the shadows nearby. A BMW watches the yellow truck. This one a broadcast truck, which pulls out just ahead of the nuclear convoy. The protagonist looks back through the BMW's side mirror, which is cracked. The BMW sees the blue truck, a wrecker, which pulls out onto the larger street just beyond the convoy, which is now surrounded on 3 sides by the colored trucks. Volkov in the Mercedes follows the convoy into the radio. 3 trucks in place. Sador over the radio. Watch everything and give me all the details. Sador sits in the shadows, listening intently. The BMW zips ahead, weaving through traffic, and pulls alongside the fire truck. The protagonist, dressed as a firefighter, jumps out of the BMW and grabs onto the side of the fire truck, banging the side to signal the driver. The fire truck pulls out onto the 3-lane highway. The fire truck pulls alongside the nuclear convoy, slotting in on the left, so that the convoy is now surrounded. The protagonist climbs onto the roof beside the ladder and puts on a pair of heavy-duty gloves. He pulls a diagonal backpack around onto his front, checking his tools. Blue co-pilot and yellow co-pilot count down in unison over the radio. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go! The blue truck behind the convoy guns the accelerator. The yellow truck in front of the convoy slams on the brakes. The 2 SUVs are accordioned against the nuclear truck, then carried forward with the nuclear truck as the colored trucks close formation and pull forward, maintaining pace. Go, yellow! The yellow co-pilot in the broadcast truck sends out static. The security driver is trying his radio, but only gets static. In the Tallinn police station, a police operator is frowning, trying the radio. He calls to his supervisor. In Estonian, it's subtitled, Radio down. Are they still moving? The police operator checks his screen and nods. Tires howling, the convoy grinds forward. The blue co-pilot tosses a dye pack onto the windshield of the SUV. It blasts across the glass, obscuring his view. Yellow co-pilot does the same in the front. The guards are now blind and cannot open their doors or shoot through the bulletproof vehicles. The protagonist climbs onto the ladder, lying on top. Inside, the red co-pilot operates the ladder controls. The ladder swings out at 90 degrees, hanging the protagonist directly over the nuclear truck. He pulls a frame from his pack and unfolds it. He fixes it to the roof. The ladder swings him away and the frame explodes. He swings back through the smoke to find the opening and climbs into the nuclear transport truck. He lands, gets his bearings, and finds the safe. He reaches into his pack. On a Tallinn street, an Estonian police car pulls up behind the fire truck. The police spots sparks from the dragging bumper of the SUV. The police passenger tries his radio, but only gets static. The protagonist affixes a charge to the safe. He runs a wire, pushing back into the farthest corner, and blasts the door open. Watching the police through his mirror, red passenger rolls down his window and props an assault rifle on the sill. The protagonist reaches into the safe, pulls out an orange plastic case, reaches up to climb through the roof. The protagonist, orange case in hand, climbs onto the ladder. Red passenger swings his rear opening door out and shoots out the engine block of the police car, which drops back. As the fire truck ladder swings the protagonist back onto the fire truck. He climbs down onto the side. The BMW pulls alongside. He jumps into the car, which speeds away. Neil, driving, glancing at the orange case. We got it! The protagonist opens the latches and flips open the lid, revealing the black metal shape the size of a softball. I've seen samples of encapsulation in every weapons class. This is not one of them. Neil looks back at the protagonist, serious. It's what he's after. The protagonist looks around at the surrounding traffic. Check the radio chatter. Neil clicks the radio. Emphatic gibberish. I can't understand. You said you spoke Estonian. It's not Estonian. It's backwards. Up ahead, an Audi is weaving through traffic towards them, backwards. Neil stares. What the hell? The backwards running Audi flies at them, clipping the wing mirror, healing its crack. Behind them, it spins around to chase them, still running backwards. The BMW dodges around traffic, trying to lose the backwards Audi, which pulls up to the back bumper and then alongside. In the back is Sador, black eyes peering over a respirator, a gun to Kat's head. She's bound and gagged, eyes terrified. Sador rolls the rear window down and holds up his hand, fingers extended. He cocks the gun at Kat's head and then starts counting down on his fingers. The protagonist looks down at the black metal shape in the case. You can't give it to him! The protagonist lifts the case closed and lowers the window. This isn't plutonium. Sador is down to 2 fingers. Ahead of them in the road, the protagonist can see a smashed, smoking, upside-down Saab. It's worse, goddammit! Both cars race toward the crashed Saab, which starts shaking as they approach. As they pass, the crashed Saab rolls violently over and over between them until it's on its wheels, racing backwards ahead of them, undamaged. Neil regains his line and looks over at Sador, who holds up his last finger. The protagonist looks ahead to the Saab, struck by an idea. The protagonist looks at Sador, and then tosses the orange case to him. The Saab brakes, cutting between the 2 cars. The orange case glances off its windshield into Sador's hands. A forward-moving Mercedes pulls up alongside the backward-driving Audi. Sador opens the rear door, and he and the Audi driver climb backward into the Mercedes, leaving Kat in the accelerating backwards Audi. The Mercedes drops far behind the BMW as Neil watches. He's getting away! He left her in the car! Neil looks forward to the backwards Audi speeding away. No one is at the wheel. As the car continues to accelerate, Kat lies in the back, breathing and groaning, but unconscious. The protagonist stares ahead at the backwards Audi. Pull up alongside. Neil looks back at the receding Mercedes, followed by the backwards Saab. He turns, racing to pull alongside the runaway backwards Audi. The protagonist opens his door. Ahead, a log jam of traffic. The protagonist fumbles to open the Audi door. Kat! Kat! In the back, Kat swings her bound legs around. The logjam of cars and buses looms closer. The protagonist opens the Audi door, but his own door hits it and slams it closed again. The logjam is dangerously close. The protagonist opens it again. Kat jams it open with her feet. The protagonist climbs across and pushes the brake with his hand. The Audi skids to a halt, the BMW zooming past. The protagonist starts to untie Kat, fumbling with his radio. The BMW skids to a halt, and Neil jumps out. A car skids to a halt between the BMW and the Audi. Blam, blam! Neil ducks, avoiding gunfire. Over the radio. Sit tight, I'm calling in the cavalry. What cavalry? Smash! The protagonist and Kat are thrown like rag dolls across the car. The Mercedes has swiped the nose of the Audi. Volkov lays down cover fire, pinning Neil as Sador's men descend on the crashed Audi and pull the protagonist out of the car, shoving him around the back of the Mercedes. Kat is pulled from the wreck and put into the Mercedes. As they put the protagonist into the trunk, he sees Sador moving backward behind the line of cars from the BMW. We cut to a dockside area on the edge of Tallinn, moments later. The trunk opens and the protagonist is pulled out. march toward an entrance. He sees through a steel fence dividing the yards in two, Sador, in a respirator, walking backwards, pulling Kat forwards toward a different entrance. The protagonist passes a stack of shipping containers, several of which are marked Oslo Freeport. The protagonist is taken past the table of weapons, through a large door, and through red doors with a porthole, into a long chamber divided in two by a glass window, a much bigger version of the Rotas vault. The Russians push the protagonist into a chair. This side is lit by red light. On the other side of the glass, lit by blue light, Sador enters, backwards, pulling Kat, who's now in a respirator. Sador shoves her hard into a chair and removes his own respirator, flipping it up onto a hook in the wall. The protagonist looks into Kat's frightened eyes. Between them, embedded in a whirl of cracked glass, is a bullet. Sador turns to meet the protagonist's gaze. His movements have a surreal edge of backward motion as he places his gun against Kat's head and pulls out his phone. He holds his phone up and plays a recording in reverse. "If you're not telling the truth, she dies." Sador moves his phone to his lips, speaking in reverse. The protagonist stares at him, bemused. "I don't know what you're talking about." Sador listens to this played backwards, via recording. "You left it in the car, not the fire truck, right?" "Who told you that?" Sador via recording. "Tell me now, is it really in the BMW?" "I don't know." "Tell me or I'll shoot her again." The protagonist looks at Kat, who's terrified. Kat pleading. "Tell him." Then at Sador. "Leave her alone." "I don't have time to negotiate." The protagonist looks at the bullet hole in the glass. Wisps of smoke are gathering. "Listen to me, I can help you." 3. "Don't! Help me!" 2. "Please!" A faint trickle of glass dust rises to where the bullet is lodged in the window. "Wait!" 1. Sador lifts Kat and pushes her up against the glass. "Please!" "No!" The smoke coalesces as, bang, the bullet rips through Kat's side on its inevitable journey to Sador's gun. Kat screams. "Next one is a bullet to the head." He holds up a finger. Kat is screaming. 1. "Please." 2. "No." 3. Okay, it's in the car, the BMW. I left it in the BMW. Kat's screams subside to moans as she passes out. "We're going to check this is real. It's in the glove box." The door opens behind the protagonist. "Where did you leave it?" The protagonist spins around. Sador behind him smashes his gun into the protagonist's cheek. This is Sador forwards. "Car or truck, which one?" Sador hits him again. The protagonist falls near the glass and looks up through the glass to see backwards Sador on the blue side staring at him dispassionately. "What vehicle did you leave it in? I need to know before I go out there." "I already told you." Forward Sador looks through the window at his inverse self and then turns back to the protagonist. "I believe you." Sador puts his gun to the protagonist's forehead. He indicates Kat. "You wanted her here. I hope you'll be happy together." Sador cocks his weapon, and blam, blam! The double doors behind the protagonist smash open. Paramilitaries burst in, guns blazing. The 2 guards are shot. Sador jumps for the vault and hits a button. On the other side of the glass, inverted Sador runs backward toward the other vault door. Both Sadors jump inside and are gone. A paramilitary sergeant enters, gun drawn. "Clear!" The protagonist looks at the empty vault. "Where did he go?" "The past." Sador runs out of the turnstile, into the blue side of the room. On the other side, he sees the paramilitary ambush in reverse. For a few seconds, he watches his older self interrogate the protagonist. Then he fires up his phone, steps up to the glass. The protagonist shouts passionately. It's in the glove box. Via recording. We're going to check this is real. Okay, the car, the BMW. I left it in the BMW. The sound of cats moaning is building and building. Sador holds up one finger. 3. Via recording, the protagonist yells, No! Adds a second finger. 2. Cat is screaming now. Please! And a third. 1. Next bullet's in the head. Cat's screaming crescendos as Sador grabs her and pushes her up against the glass, pulls his trigger, healing her wound. 1. Protagonist via recording. Wait! He holds up 2 fingers. 2. Don't! Sador holds up 3 fingers. 3. Listen to me, I can help you. I don't have time to negotiate. The protagonist looks confused. Leave her alone. Tell me or I'll shoot her again. I don't know. Tell me, is it really in the BMW? Who told you that? You left it in the car, not the fire truck, right? I don't know what you're talking about. If you're not telling the truth, she dies. Sador grabs his respirator from the hook and pulls Kat to her feet, drags her backward through the door, down a corridor into an airlock, pulls off her respirator, and puts his on. The protagonist looks through the glass at Kat. A female paramilitary yells, She's been shot! Get her to this side. Respirator-clad paramilitaries pull Kat out of the room. The paramilitary sergeant turns to the protagonist. Was she shot with an inverted bullet? The protagonist nods. Neil enters and gestures to the sergeant. This is Ives. He's one of us. The protagonist grabs Neil and throws him up against the wall. Us? Who are these guys? Prias. Ours. The paramilitaries bring Kat into the room. The medic, moving swiftly, examines Kat's wounds. The protagonist pulls his arm against Neil's throat. How did Sador know about the ambush? Posterity. An ambush on the streets can't stay out of the record. Bullshit. He knew every move we made. Somebody talked. Was it you? No. At every stage you've known more than you should. I'm asking you one more time. Did you talk? Nobody talked. They're running a temporal pincer movement. Ives is next to the protagonist, ready to help Neil. A what? A pincer movement, but not in space, in time. Half his team moves forward through the event. He monitors them, and then attacks from the end, moving backwards, knowing everything. Except where I stashed the plutonium. The protagonist lets Neil go. Which is not plutonium, is it? I told you, it's what he's after, and you just told him where it is. I lied. Neil looks at Kat, bleeding out on the gurney. Jesus. He couldn't verify from inside the room. He'd have shot her anyway. Lying is standard operating procedure. The medic steps away from Kat and shakes his head. It's spread too far. Meaning what? She's gonna die. Neil to the protagonist. Standard operating procedure? To Ives. Can't you stabilize inverse radiation by inverting the patient? That takes days. The protagonist points at the turnstile. Let's go. We took control of this machine minutes ago. Before that, it's Sador's. How long will she live on this side? 3 hours, tops. The protagonist thinks. He looks at Kat, who's dying. I'm taking her through. I'm not going to let her die. I'll take my chances out there. Chances of what? We've got no way to bring you back in. We'll find another machine. A week ago? Where? The protagonist looks at Neil. They have the same idea. Oslo. That facility's impregnable. It's inside an airport security perimeter. Not last week, it wasn't. We're going in. You might as well help. Ives, shaking his head, joins in. As they carry Kat toward the vault door, Ives points at the glass partition. This is the proving window. As you approach the turnstile, if you don't see yourself through the proving window, do not enter the machine. Why not? If you haven't seen yourself reverse exit the machine, you won't be getting out. Okay, first in, last out. Get into the turnstile, pass through. I'll already be there with her. Is that gonna work? Ives pauses, watching activity on the other side of the window. Yeah, he points. The protagonist turns to see himself on the other side of the glass, moving in reverse, wheeling Kat toward the vault door. Let's go! Ives opens the door. The protagonist takes one last look at his backward self entering the machine, then steps inside. We follow him in as the door shuts behind him. He puts his back to the wall. The machine starts clanking like an MRI. The door opens on the other side, and he steps out. To see Ives struggling with Kat, he moves to help. Neil is already there. First in, last out. The protagonist looks through the glass to where he and Ives now appear to be moving backwards. The medic tends to Kat. She's stabilizing slowly. I'll clean and close. The rest is time. How long does she need? 4 or 5 days. A week to be sure. The protagonist to Neil. Figure out how to get us to Oslo. I've got to get back out there. To do what? To stop Sador getting away with whatever it is I just gave him. You didn't. You lied about where it was. Wait, you're going out there for her. He's threatening to kill her in the past. If he does, what happens to her here? It's unknowable. If you were to make the change, you're not there to observe its effect. What do you believe? What's happened, happened. We have to save her here and now. If you go back out there, you might hand him exactly what he's after. Don't let them take her back through. I won't. You can't stay here. And we don't have much time, so find us a nice cozy shipping container that just came off a ship from Oslo. The protagonist moves toward the door and Ives steps up. This is cowboy shit. You have no idea what you're getting into if you go through that door. Well, I'm going, so any tips would be welcome. Ives sees his determination and shakes his head. Wheeler, brief him. The female paramilitary, Wheeler, hands the protagonist a respirator. You need your own air. Regular air won't pass through the membranes of inverted lungs. The number 1 rule, don't come into contact with your forward self. That's the whole point of these barriers. Wheeler bangs on the proving window. And protective suits? If any of your particles come into contact with... The protagonist is putting on the respirator. What? Annihilation. That's bad, right? The protagonist follows Wheeler into a corridor lined with respirators and hazard suits. At the end is an airlock. When you exit the airlock, take a moment to orient yourself. Things will feel strange. When you run, the wind will be at your back. If you encounter fire, ice will form on your suit as the transfer of heat is reversed. Gravity will feel normal, but appear reversed for the world around you. Don't worry about things falling as much as rising. If you see an object demonstrating unprompted instability, stay clear. It may be about to leap into the air. You may experience distortions to your vision and hearing. This is normal. Light waves and sound waves are propagating away from you. This should be clear as your brain adjusts. Can I drive a car? Ives. Cowboy shit. Ives and Neil are grabbing respirators. I can't vouch for the handling. Friction and wind resistance are reversed. You're inverted, the world is not. You can't fight the prevailing wind of entropy. Don't try flying a plane. It would fall out of the sky. Once again, you're inverted, the world is not. And those forces will be pushing back on you continuously. The protagonist turns to Neil. Was there a transponder in the case? He'll have tossed the case. I'm going backwards. That's the ball I have to follow. Give me the reader. Neil hands him a phone. The protagonist sticks a Bluetooth earpiece in his ear, passes into the airlock. Wheeler shuts it behind him, then opens the outer door. The protagonist emerges into a strange world. The air feels different. The friction of his feet on the asphalt feels different. He looks up at the birds flying backwards, at steam contracting, at a pile of dust sucking itself bigger. In the yard he spots the Saab. He runs over and finds the keys sitting on the front tire. The protagonist looks in the glove box, but nothing. He looks in the wheel well, nothing. The back seat, nothing. He gives up and starts the engine. He pulls out gently, feeling out the strange handling of the vehicle. The protagonist steers the car around backwards moving traffic and backwards walking pedestrians, marveling. People stare at the car as it approaches, as if they already know a backwards driven car is heading their way, which, of course, they do. He checks the phone, a blinking dot half a mile away. He guns it, fishtailing unexpectedly. We see the firefight on the highway from before in reverse. Neil laying down fire from between cars. Kat carried back to the Audi. Behind Neil, Sador, moving forwards, checks the glove compartment of the BMW. Nothing. Fuming, he heads back to the Mercedes, ducking behind cars, bullets flying. The protagonist pulls onto a busy highway where the cars are facing him, but moving in his direction. The Saab races along, the only normal-looking car on a road full of cars speeding backwards. On the phone, the flashing dot is closer. Slowing, the protagonist spots the orange case lying empty by the side of the road. He pulls over some distance away, jumps out of the car, pulls out his Bluetooth earpiece and wedges it between the foam padding and the orange plastic. The protagonist heads back to his car, checks the signal from his phone, and peers at the case. The case shudders to life, leaps into the window of a passing car, the Mercedes. The protagonist peels out, dust flying up in clouds that don't fully blossom as expected, but contract. The protagonist struggles with the wheel, trying to keep the car on the road with its unaccustomed handling. Christ! We can see the Mercedes up ahead, weaving through traffic. The Mercedes races back up the off-ramp. The Saab follows, weaving through traffic which faces him, but travels backwards. As the Saab gets within a couple car lengths, his phone cuts in with audio from his Bluetooth bug in the Mercedes. Sador over the radio. The material is not in the case. Sound cuts in and out, fragments of voices. He struggles to keep pace with the Mercedes. He listens hard. Get the other sections of the algorithm to the hypocenter. He was lying. It wasn't in the BMW. Another voice over the radio. So where is it? The protagonist finds a clear lane and guns the engine, tracking the Mercedes as it pulls alongside the Audi, racing forwards. Sador, orange case in hand, climbs from the Mercedes into the Audi. The Audi pulls alongside the BMW. The protagonist, sensing the moment, lowers his window. Sador lifts the orange case, but his eyes are elsewhere. Inside the Saab, the protagonist hears banging. The black metal shape unwedges from where it's been stuck, down in the side of a seat, bouncing around the interior. The Saab cuts between the Audi and the BMW. The orange case flies out of Sador's hand and bounces off the Saab's windshield, landing in the BMW. Just as the black metal shape jumps out of the Saab and into the protagonist's lower hand. Sador, seeing this, yanks the wheel and clips the Saab. The protagonist struggles for control, but the Saab spins and rolls down the highway, coming to rest on its roof. The protagonist, upside down in the car, regains consciousness. A fuel leak, pooling outside the window. He sees expensive shoes approach, and then Sador's face peering in at him. In his hand is a lighter. I saw the handoff. You made me shoot her for nothing. Sador tips his lighter to read his fitness tracker. You did get my pulse above 130. No one's ever done that before. Not even my wife. Backing away, Sador drops the lighter and the fuel explodes, throwing the car sideways. But instead of fully blooming, the flames contract, sparing the protagonist who lies there freezing. He passes out. Later, inside a shipping container, the protagonist comes to on a stretcher. Kat is on the stretcher next to him. Neil sits between them. The protagonist looks at his hands and feels his face, confused. The heat transfer was reversed. You may be the first case of hypothermia from a gasoline explosion in history. At this point, nothing surprises. The protagonist looks around the shipping container. You left Ives and his team one hell of a cleanup. We're on our way back to Oslo? In a Rotas shipping container. He's got the material, Neil. I handed it to him on a plate. I warned you. What's happened's happened. I get it now. But it's tough to take things on trust from people speaking half-truths. That's not fair. You were part of this before we met. Were you working for Priya? No. Who recruited you, Neil? It can't possibly do any good to know that right now. When this is over, if we're still standing and you still care, you can hear my life story, okay? Kat groans. Her eyes flicker open to see the protagonist. I'm sorry I involved you. You need to tell me what's going on. Apparently, Neil here knows more about it than I do. He points to Neil. Good luck, pal. By telling Kat anything, we're compromising her in Priya's eyes. In Priya's eyes, she's already compromised, and she has a right to know why she might die. Am I going to die? Not if we have anything to say about it. And we do. Who are you? Let me start with the simple stuff. Every law of physics operates the same forwards and backwards, except one. Entropy. The protagonist moves to the back of the container and pulls out his phone. He checks Neil's attention is on Kat. Sador via recording. Bring final section directly to the hypocenter with the other parts, the algorithm. The recording breaks up. The protagonist puts the phone away, flexes his elbow, feeling out some pain. He rolls up his sleeve. There's a dark patch of skin forming. Are you injured? What's the algorithm, Neil? The 241 is one section of it, 1 out of 9. It's a formula, rendered into physical form so it can't be copied or communicated. A black box with one function. What is it? Inversion, but not objects or people. The world around us. I don't understand. As they invert the entropy of more and more objects, Neil holds his hands, fingers spread, pointing at each other. The two directions of time become more intertwined. He slowly brings his fingers together into the Tenet gesture. But because the environment's entropy flows in our direction, he pushes one hand back with the other. We dominate. They're always swimming upstream. It's what saved your life. The inverted explosion was pushing against the environment. Pissing in the wind. But the algorithm can change the direction of the wind. It can invert the entropy of the world. And if that happens? Oh, end of play. End of play? Can you be a little more precise? Our present wiped out. Our past obliterated. Everyone and everything who's ever lived. Destroyed instantly. Precise enough? Including my son. Neil nods gravely. Kat winces, clearly in pain. Let me sedate you. The more you sleep, the faster you'll heal. Neil injects Kat in the arm, and her eyes close. Close on the hull of the cargo ship, we see the water unsplashing at the bow and sucking underneath the stern, as the ship steams majestically backward through the cold North Sea. Banging wakes the protagonist. Neil is at a peephole. We're on a truck. Shouldn't be too long now. Neil is awake. He looks over at the protagonist, who's examining a lesion on his right arm. Are you in pain? Must have been nicked in Tallinn. He rolls down the sleeve. I've been thinking. We're their ancestors. If they destroy us, won't that destroy them? Bringing us to the grandfather paradox. The what? The classic thought experiment. If you went back in time and killed your own grandfather, how could you have been born to commit the act? What's the answer? There is no answer. It's a paradox. But in the future, those in power clearly believe that you can kick Grandpa down the stairs, gauge his eyes, and slit his throat without consequence. Could they be right? It doesn't matter. They believe it. So they're willing to destroy us. Can I go back to sleep? No, I thought of something else. Great. This reversing the flow of time. Doesn't us being here now mean it never happens? That we stop them? Optimistically, I'd say that that's right. Pessimistically? In a parallel worlds theory, We can't know the relationship between consciousness and multiple realities. Does your head hurt yet? Yes. Try sleep. A final thud, then stillness. The protagonist moves to the peephole, unplugs it, and peers out. The wrecked plane, floodlit, sitting outside the collapsed wall, which has been sealed with steel fencing. Shit, they didn't take us inside. What do we do? We use the breach, the chaos right after impact. Get ready. They both turn to look at the unconscious cat. Is she healed enough? I don't know. I've never done this before. The protagonist is at the peephole. The ground is wet. Cleanup crews and investigators swarm backwards over the scene. Sirens start and water flows up onto the plane's wings. Fire crews unpack their equipment around the wreck. Fire crews there. The protagonist winces as he pulls his arm into his sleeve. We get Kat through the breach. I take care of Sador's men and secure the vault. Then you bring her in. How's the arm? Not good. The protagonist spots a hole in the fabric of his black suit, directly over the lesion on his arm. Neil straps a respirator to the gurney and puts the mask over Kat's face, then puts another on himself. He gives Kat a sedative. We move the second we hear the engines. Neil looks at Kat, unconscious on the gurney. He tightens the straps and throws a reflective blanket over her. The sirens are deafening. The protagonist flexes his arm, clearly in a lot of pain. Neil spots blood dripping from the protagonist's wrist. You're bleeding, let me take a look. Suddenly they hear the building whine of jet engines. The protagonist yanks up the handle, throws open the door, and onto pandemonium. The fire crews battle the blaze. Chunks of metal on the ground ignite, shudder, and leap into the airframe. Streams of water rise up onto the plane. The protagonist hurries backward, pulling the gurney toward the plane, steering around debris that might suddenly... A sheet of flaming metal spins off the ground, shearing into them, knocking the gurney. They duck, holding on to the gurney. The metal flies into the air and slams into its hole on the side of the plane. The protagonist spots a line under the fuselage, between the flames, toward the breach. Come on! Neil looks up as black smoke gathers, forming a massive cloud over the plane. A shockwave starts to build in the air around them. The protagonist pulls Kat and Neil under the fuselage as curtains of fire start gathering around the wings, centered on a half-destroyed jet engine. They pass through the hole in the wall, licked at by flames, which leave frost on their clothing. As they clear into the building, debris in front of them starts shaking. They duck as the massive build of energy climaxes in a cacophony reverse explosion, as the jet engine reassembles, loosely attached to the wing, thrusting. The protagonist draws his gun and turns to Neil. I'm going in. Wait here. The protagonist turns, rushing up onto the loading dock. The loose jet engine, under full thrust, attached to the wings, swings back and forth, wreaking reverse havoc. The protagonist pauses, listening. He can hear backward voices on the other side of a rolling door. The loose jet engine turns, blasting air at the protagonist with its inverted thrust. The protagonist is smashed through the bottom of the rolling door. Into himself and Neil, dressed as a businessman, in their earlier visit to the Rotas vault. The protagonist, wearing black clothes and gas mask, tackles the earlier protagonist, wearing a business suit. The earlier protagonist throws the protagonist onto the ground, getting his gun, shouting at him incomprehensibly, kicking his injured arm again and again. The protagonist screams. The earlier protagonist puts his gun to the protagonist's head. Earlier Neil grabs his arm, restraining him. The protagonist and earlier protagonist struggle, rolling across the floor with the unique physics of forward action, merged with backwards action. They struggle through the blue door of the Rotas vault. The protagonist gets his gun. The earlier protagonist stabs him in the arm with his lockpick, healing his wound, energizing him. He flips the earlier protagonist up against the glass and lifts his gun. He shoots past the earlier protagonist's head, putting a bullet hole through the glass. Glancing at the open turnstile door, the protagonist fires again, forcing the earlier protagonist toward the door. He looks through the proving window. No one there. Come on, come on! The protagonist fires again and again, forcing the earlier protagonist closer and closer to the open turnstile. The earlier protagonist takes hold of the gun, the barrel coming around onto the protagonist, who instinctively ejects the magazine, removes the slide, tossing it aside, leaving the earlier protagonist with a useless, stripped automatic. Earlier Neil races backwards into the other half of the room. Through the bullet-riddled glass, the protagonist sees himself with a gas mask and black clothes running backwards into the room. The protagonist leaps into the turnstile. We follow the protagonist through the machine, bursting out on the other side, straight into earlier Neil, who now moves forwards as the protagonist pushes past. As the confrontation on the other side of the glass plays out again, forwards, the protagonist races for the red door. Neil in pursuit. The protagonist runs, pursued by earlier Neil, skidding around the corners of the vault corridor. Earlier Neil gets a hand on the protagonist's gas mask and yanks. It comes off in his hands. This time, we see that Neil is looking at the unmasked protagonist. Neil, surprised, turns and bolts back the way he came. The protagonist watches him go and then turns. The protagonist races down the angled corridor. The protagonist skids through the doorway leading out of the corridor and into the smoke-filled cargo area where he left. Neil races up to the earlier protagonist and grabs his arm. "No! Don't kill him!" Neil, respirator on, guarding Kat, strapped to the gurney in the Freeport shipping area. Behind them, the fire crew battle the blazing plane. Neil is already looking up at the protagonist, who points right. The protagonist ducks through the breach into the chaos. Neil moves backward toward the outside. The protagonist runs through the smoke and flame, dodging debris falling from the plane, heading toward the emergency services. The protagonist creeps along the side of an ambulance. The ambulance driver spots him in the mirror. The protagonist darts in, hitting the driver in the face. Neil, moving forwards, ducks back behind the corner as earlier protagonist, business suit, and earlier Neil, business suit, walk backward away from the Rotus vault. Neil pushes Kat toward the broken roller door and pushes her inside. The protagonist swerves the ambulance, trying to get close to the breach. The protagonist spins the ambulance around as close to the breach as possible. He jumps out, opens the back, peers into the smoke and water, and waits. Neil emerges, pushing the gurney with Kat on. The protagonist drives the ambulance, sirens blaring. "You knew it was me coming out of that vault. Why didn't you say? There's a lot of explaining when someone's about to put a bullet in their own brain. But afterwards, with things the same, I knew you'd be okay. What's happened, happened. If I had told you and you acted differently, who knows? The policy is to suppress." "Whose policy?" Neil grins, offering his hand. "Ours, my friend. We're the people saving the world from what might have been." Neil and the protagonist are in the back, checking on Kat, whose eyes are open. "Kat?" "I'm here." Neil checks the dressing on her wound. "Be quite the scar, but you're okay. We did it." "Did what? Andre's got the algorithm. You don't know where he is." Neil looks at the protagonist. "Or when?" "Get Priya here to Oslo." "Why?" "If I don't do something now, in 2 days, she'll tell me about the 241. Nothing can change that." "We'll see. Just get her here." At the Oslo War Memorial, the protagonist makes his way through the crowd, following an elegantly dressed lady, Priya. He takes her by the arm, away from the crowd. "Hello, Priya. What's going on? Where's Neil?" "Nursing Catherine Barton, who almost died because of you." "What did I do?" "It's what you're going to do. In 2 days you're going to have me dangle plutonium-241 in front of the world's most dangerous arms dealer. And I want to know why." "You let him get hold of 241? "No, I let him get hold of the algorithm." Priya looks at the protagonist, surprised he knows the term. "Tell me about it, Priya." "It's unique. The scientist who built it took her own life, so she couldn't be forced to make another." A scientist in the future. Generations from now. Why did she have to kill herself? You're familiar with the Manhattan Project. As they approached the first atomic test, Oppenheimer became concerned the detonation might produce a chain reaction, engulfing the world. They went ahead anyway, and got lucky. Think of our scientist as her generation's Oppenheimer. She devises a method for inverting the world, but becomes convinced that by destroying us, they destroy themselves. The grandfather paradox. Unlike Oppenheimer, she rebels, splitting the algorithm into 9 sections and hiding them the best place she can think of. The past, here and now. There are 9 nuclear powers, 9 bombs, 9 sets of the most closely guarded materials in the history of the world, the best hiding places possible. Nuclear containment facilities. Sator's lifelong mission, financed and guided by the future, has been to find and reassemble the algorithm. Why did they choose him? The necessary combination of greed and ambition, but mostly he was in the right place at the right time. The collapse of the Soviet Union. The most insecure moment in the history of nuclear weapons. And there he was. How many of the sections does he have? After 241? All 9. Christ. That's why we're going to do it differently this time. To change things? So Catherine won't get hurt? So Sator won't get the algorithm. If that universe can exist, we don't live in it. Let's try. You're going to warn me. No, I'm not. Ignorance is our ammunition, and if you'd known what the algorithm was, would you have let it fall into Sator's hands? You want him to get the last section? It's the only way he'll bring together the other 8. I was supposed to steal it then, and then lose it? Priya smiles. Mission accomplished. You used me. As you used Catherine. Standard operating procedure. You've done your part. My part? I'm the protagonist of this operation. You're a protagonist. Off look. What? You thought you were the only person capable of saving the world? No, but I am, because I haven't told you where he's assembling the algorithm or when. You're about to. No, I'm not. So deal us in. Why would you involve her again? She can get close to him. Does he still trust her? He thinks she's dead, but he used to. You have started looking at the world in a new way. And now it's your turn. Assuming she makes it out alive, whether or not you feel she knows too much. I can't. If you don't have the authority, talk to whoever's in charge of loose ends. I need your word that she and her son will be safe. Priya, frustrated. What good is someone's word in our line of business? The protagonist just looks at her and she nods. They'll be safe. There's a rally point offshore at Trondheim. Get yourself up there. We cut to a wind farm in Norway. Chinooks cross backwards through white turbines. Service boats pull people off ladders. A large icebreaker sits nearby. The protagonist, in respirator, does pull-ups on deck, the movement shaking snow back onto the pipe. Ives has a team ready to invert. We cut back to the protagonist in Oslo. You have a turnstile, the exact technology we're trying to suppress? The protagonist watches a Chinook long line a container. Fighting fire with fire is a treacherous business, but there are people in the future who need us to continue the algorithm's journey into the past. You see, taking a look at the sea churning backwards into the stern, as the inverted ship progresses, he heads below deck. We cut back to Priya in Oslo. Tenet wasn't founded in the past. It will be founded in the future. In the hold of the icebreaker, coming out of an airlock, the protagonist removes his respirator. He walks past Wheeler, drilling Tenet soldiers. Non-inverted soldiers in respirators spar with inverted soldiers. Neil is amongst troops practicing lifting weapons from the floor. The protagonist enters and Kat sits at a window. I can't get over the birds. The protagonist follows her look to a bird flying backwards. How are you feeling? She lifts her shirt to reveal a large, jagged, angry scar. Tell me you're going to kill him. I can't. Neil enters without interruption. Kat rises, steady. Why not? I think you've probably killed a lot of people. Not with a dead man's switch. A what? That fitness tracker he wears. He's obsessive about his health. It'll be linked to a switch. Probably a simple email burst, revealing the location of a dead drop, set to fire if his heart stops. In effect, his death activates the algorithm. He dies, the world ends. No one dares kill him. Kat realizes. No, you've missed the point. He's intending to end his life. Why? He's dying. Inoperable pancreatic cancer. And he's taken the world with him. If he can't have her, no one can. What? Something he said once. He has a child, for God's sake. Kat, he gets to choose the time and place for the end of the world. What moment? What does he choose? You told me about a holiday where you let him feel loved. Vietnam, on our yacht. Well, his yacht. You said he vanished. What day? I went ashore with Max. He flew off. I didn't know what date it was. The 14th, 10 days ago. He was in Ukraine stealing a section of the algorithm from an American team. At the Kiev Opera siege. How do you know about that? The point is, he wasn't on the yacht, so that's his window. To come back to that golden moment and have it be his last. Everyone's last. We have to lift the algorithm from the dead drop without Sadar knowing. If he believes it's in there, he kills himself. And not the rest of us. So where's the dead drop? Knowledge divided, my friend. You're not going to tell me? Ignorance is our ammunition. He turns to her. But I need you back on that boat. Why? You have to stop him killing himself until we know the algorithm is out of the dead drop. But if I'm caught there, and my son sees, I don't want those moments full of anguish if they're going to be his last. They're not. The protagonist later watches the troops prepare. Cough it up, it's time. The protagonist turns to face Ives. We're working our way back to the 14th, but without knowing where the dead drop is, there's only so much I can prepare. You need me to get you there. Do you know what a hypocenter is? Ives shakes his head. Ground zero for an underground nuclear test. Sir Michael Crosby told me about a detonation at Stalsk 12 on the 14th. The dead drop's at the bottom of the hypocenter. That explosion seals up the algorithm. Then we better pull it out of that hole before the bomb goes off. Soldiers in respirators file into the turnstile. Through the proving window, we see them back into the exit. The protagonist checks his gear at the back of the line. He sees Kat watching from the airlock, and he goes to her. The protagonist pulls off his respirator. Where's Neil? He must have already gone through. I didn't get to say goodbye. This is goodbye, isn't it? Today's the 14th. Offshore of Siberia. Time for us to go. You keep going back another day. Give you time to make it to Vietnam. Who gets me back on the yacht? I've got someone good lined up. I'd like to say you don't have to do this, but... I once told you I didn't need redemption, but the chance to save my child? You can't know what that means to a mother. No. The worst thing Andre ever did to me was that offer, to let me go if I never saw my son again. I shouted and swore. We insert a cut of Kat flinging a crystal bowl of raspberries, smashing it on a wooden deck. But he'd seen it on my face, just for an instant. Kat looks at the protagonist, who says nothing. I don't know if I hate him more for the things he's done, or because he knows that about me. You've killed people you hated before? It's not usually personal. He's dying anyway. It might not even count. It always counts. You're not there to kill him. You're the backstop. If we haven't lifted that algorithm and he kills himself, he takes us all with him instantly. Kat moves to the protagonist in close. Just keep your end, okay? The protagonist nods, and she kisses him. When it's over, and you're raising your boy, carry this. The protagonist hands her a dumb phone. There may be a place in time you feel threatened. Hit talk, state your location, and hang up. Who gets that message? Posterity. The protagonist watches the icebreaker recede. 3 Chinooks zoom low over the barren landscape, followed by another 3 Chinooks long-lining shipping containers. The protagonist sits among a dozen soldiers. They watch the endless northern plain unroll beneath them. The protagonist gets off the Chinook, watching another Chinook gently set down a container. He follows the others to a tent. Soldiers in folding chairs facing a screen. The protagonist looks around. Still no Neil. Ives stands up, signals for the projector. A devastated city, gray concrete, abandoned industry, amongst terraced strip mines. Stalls 12, hidden from the world. A city where anything can happen, and today, gentlemen, for 10 minutes, it most assuredly does. Ives switches to a graphic, a childish simple diagram of landing area, buildings, then an underground cavern. You were divided into 2 teams for a temporal pincer movement. We are red team moving forward. Our friends out there. He gestures at the containers. Blue team, led by Commander Wheeler, are inverted. 1 hour from now, they had this briefing. We insert a cut of Neil in a respirator in the front row of Commander Wheeler's briefing of Blue team. All are in respirators. Back to the red team briefing. Then, we're dropped on the ridge above the hypo center as close in time to the detonation as possible. Their objectives were clearance and clarification. This briefing has the benefit of their experience. And yes, some of you specialists are on both teams. The protagonist overhears. One of the soldiers whispers, "Why don't they let us see them? Maybe we won't like what happened." In Vietnam, a speedboat bounces through the chop. Mahir, from the Freeport heist, is at the helm. Kat beside him shields her eyes from the glare as they head towards Sador's yacht. They pull up some way off. A chopper sits on the yacht. Mahir hands Kat binoculars, and Kat watches her earlier self and her son board the tender and head for shore. Ives gestures across the whole area on the schematic. The whole area is radioactive, so both teams wear full protection. To distinguish teams, wear these. A soldier starts passing out red armbands. We insert a cut of Neil in respirator, taking a blue armband, and like the rest of the team, he puts it on. Ives points to each of the 3 elements in turn. Landing zone LZ, well defended, including ground-to-air ordnance. We drop in, clear the LZ for blue team's evacuation. We make our way into the city proper. These buildings are abandoned, but we learned they have a turnstile in this one, so expect a bitemporal response. They have inverse ordnance? Inverse conventional, forwards antagonist, inverted antagonists, they have it all. And it can end you. Got it? Ives goes back to the diagram. On the other side of the city, the ground rises to the ridge above the hypocenter. Most of you will proceed up the hill. A splinter unit will take a tunnel from the city to the floor of the hypocenter. Blue team located an entrance here. Ives points to the city's edge, then to the cavern. The bomb is in the rock high above to trigger a collapse, sealing the cavern. How do we defuse the bomb up there? We don't. The explosion takes place as planned exactly 10 minutes after our landing. Everything is synchronized to that explosion. Both teams have countdown watches. Ours counts from 10 at the landing to 0 at the explosion. He holds up his wrist to display a blood-red 10. Blue team is the reverse. We insert a cut of the previous briefing from the blue team. Neil watches as Wheeler holds up her wrist to show a vivid blue 10. 10 at the explosion, to 0 at our extraction. If you're not at the LZ by 0, you are not leaving. Back to the red team briefing. Our job is to fail to defuse the bomb while the splinter unit achieves its task undetected. Which is, need to know, and you don't. Any other stupid questions? Right, let's get ready. Everybody rises. The protagonist approaches Ives. I want to be on the first wave. There is no first wave. Red team and blue team operate simultaneously. Do not get on the chopper if you can't stop thinking in linear terms. You want to be on the team who lifts the contents of the capsule. Absolutely. That's us, we're the Splinter Unit. Just us? No one who knows the contents of that capsule can leave the field. I thought we'd manage ourselves. Cutting to Vietnam, Mahir shows Kat how to use a small pistol. Kat wears a two-piece bathing suit with a shirt over. He puts the pistol in a diver's bag, loops the lanyard around Kat's bare ankle. It's 40 feet from the private deck to the water. Can you jump it? I can dive it. They hear the chopper spin up. Mahir shows her a flare gun. Until you see my signal, you don't let him die. Kat nods. The chopper lifts off and zooms overhead. Mahir guns the powerboat, streaking toward the yacht. Back in the camp, the soldiers head for the Chinooks. As they pass the containers, some stare at them. The Chinooks lift off. Some rise, lifting the containers. In Vietnam, Mahir pulls up 50 yards from the stern of Sador's yacht. Kat grabs the pistol bag and slips into the water. The Chinooks beat low over the windswept plain. Stalsk 12 appears on the horizon. Terraced strip mine land leading to a set of concrete structures fused to the earth. Kat quietly pulls herself out of the water and onto a rear platform of the yacht. She stealthily makes her way through the boat. The Chinooks' long-lining containers rise, slowing, as the other Chinooks barrel in toward the large flat area. Anti-aircraft guns start firing. The protagonist grabs his gun and leaps from the Chinook as it hovers close to the ground. The Chinook's long-lining containers fly backward toward a giant depression. Neil looks out a peephole. We're coming in on the shockwave. Hang on, people. Neil grabs his belts as, whoom, the container shudders. The shockwave contracts, the Chinook surfing backwards on the shock as it approaches the hypocenter, energy building. The ground lifts and flattens. The protagonist joins a unit of Red Team soldiers who charge an anti-aircraft emplacement, taking it out before it can fire on the slow-moving Chinooks. The protagonist uses his assault rifle to take out a gun emplacement. Ives uses an inverse grenade to violently reassemble an enemy gun emplacement out of existence, shredding the enemy with reverse shrapnel. Draw them back into the city, away from blue teams. The Chinooks drop down, land the containers. The protagonists look back to see, 100 meters away, the containers open. Blue team scrambling backwards from the containers. Some carry injured comrades, but all seem exhausted. The protagonist and Red Team press forward, blasting at the remaining enemy troops, who run for the cover of the city. The protagonist checks his watch. A bright red 9:59, 9:58. The reverse explosion peaks, and suddenly calm. As the Chinooks place the containers down, they open and the blue team runs out, forwards. Neil at the head, gun raised, blasting at enemy soldiers on the ridge. Neil checks his watch, a bright blue 9:57. He turns to see a gray truck reversing toward the hole, tires sucking up dust, a rope from its rear hitch taut into the hole. Bang, bang! Shots are sucked out of the ground around him. Blue team forces the enemy away from the hole. Toward Red Team, whose members fight backwards, Neil shouts to Wheeler, "Draw their fire! Pull them away!" Neil races down the ridge, following Wheeler. On the yacht, Kat comes to find a junior crew member cleaning up a smashed bowl of raspberries. He looks up at her, surprised. "Mom, I thought you gone ashore." "I snuck back in to surprise Andre." "The boss left." He trails off, and they hear an incoming chopper. "I'll get the mess. Have Mr. Sador find me here. Don't tell the others." The junior crew member nods and leaves. Kat moves to the rail and checks Mahir in the distance. The daybed, the water hose. The protagonist, Ives, and Red Team head toward the large concrete turnstile building on the outskirts of the city. The protagonist sees Wheeler running backward toward a bunker on their right, which unexplodes. Gunfire crackles around them, pinning them down. They hit the bunker with an RPG, then race around the left of the turnstile building. Wheeler leads Blue Team down the hill, chasing the enemy, who run backwards. A Blue Team member triggers a landmine. Another triggers an inverse landmine. "Hit the deck! Mines!" As Blue Team goes to the ground, Neil sees mines start to explode/implode in a wave toward him, as the gray truck races backward down the hill through the minefield, reverse triggering the mines. Neil dives out of the way, almost run over, then gets up to follow the path of the gray truck. Kat unzips her diver's bag and feels the handle of the gun. She then slides the bag under the daybed, checking that she can reach. She moves to the rail and crouches to unclip the bottom safety cable. She looks at Mahir's boat across the water. Ives leads the red team into the deserted concrete structures via an efficient cover-and-move formation. The protagonist shelters behind large concrete chunks, which vibrate, gathering energy. The protagonist jumps away as the chunks rip from the ground, bouncing violently and dustily off each other, and flying up into a gap in the side of a building as an inverse RPG zips back up into a window. Ives has spotted the window and calls for an RPG to follow the inverse one, blasting the building. The protagonist checks his watch, 8:10, 8:09. Neil checks his watch, 8:08, 8:07. He heads downhill toward the city, where the rest of the Blue Team beat back the enemy. Kat hoses the raspberries and glass from the deck, and Sador appears, watching as she turns the water on herself. "They told me you'd gone ashore. They told me you'd flown off. I came back to see you and Max. Max is ashore with Hannah. We need time, just you and me. After, what? I was joking, a stupid joke. You think I'm a terrible mother. We both know my opinion of you is higher than yours of me. I want things to be better, Andre." She moves toward him, and Sador nods. He picks up the phone. "Have the captain turn the boat so we'll see the sunset from here." The protagonist runs across the street, firing at the enemy. He spots the tunnel entrance between two buildings. "Ives! Splinter unit here!" Ives nods, races over, drawing fire the whole way. Neil races into the city streets. He sees Commander Wheeler and a blue soldier take shelter in a large, jagged breach in the ground floor wall of a massive structure. Neil is forced to hit the deck, ducking inverted fire all around. He looks over at Wheeler and sees dust gathering around the breach. "Wheeler! Get out of here! Wheeler!" Wheeler hears him, tries to grab the blue soldier. Massive chunks of concrete scrape over Neil's head, flying toward Wheeler, who dives clear. The wall reassembles on top of the blue soldier, crushing him. Neil winces, starts crawling for better cover, checks his watch, 6:24, 6:23. Sador looks past Kat to the lowering sun. "It's going to be a beautiful sunset. I'll get Max brought back. We should share the moment with him." Sador picks up the phone. Kat looks at the shore, uneasy. Ives and the protagonist shelter as Red Team exchanges fire with the enemy further up the street. The protagonist checks his watch. 5:15, 5:14. "Let's go, we're running out of time. If they see us, it's all for nothing. We need a distraction." Ives looks ahead to the leaning ruin of a building top. "Don't worry about that." Neil checks his watch. 5:10, 5:09. Frustrated and pinned down, he looks around for a way to break cover. Commander Wheeler, with the rest of the Blue Team, shelters in the shadow of the ruined base of a building, pinned by enemy fire from the base of the building. "RPG! Take out the base on my mark!" She checks her watch. 5:04, 5:03. The blue RPG soldier takes aim. The protagonist spots small debris rolling across the street, gathering momentum. "Ives!" Ives sees larger and larger debris is rolling down the street toward the leaning ruin of the building top. It's about to get distracting. He signals a red RPG soldier. On my mark! He looks at his watch. 5:01, 5. Fire! The leaning ruin thrusts upwards. Wheeler watches as the leaning ruin's upper stories reassemble as its base explodes. The protagonist takes cover as the leaning ruin's base reassembles. As its upper stories explode, the protagonist and Ives race at the tunnel entrance. The gray truck races at them as they dive for the tunnel. We cut to Wheeler, who ducks as the weight of the upper stories collapses the building. Neil lifts his head after the explosion/implosion. All clear. He gets up and starts running. The protagonist and Ives race into the tunnel, hitting a tripwire which blows the tunnel entrance down behind them as they jump inside. Sador hangs up. He holds a silver pill in the sunlight, studying it. What's that? I borrowed it from the CIA. But what is it? The way the world ends, not with a bang, but with a whimper. I don't understand. When I take this, it's all over. Then don't take it yet. Sador looks at her, needing her to care. Why? We've got the sunset coming, and a little vodka left. And Max will be here soon. They thought it was you, not Anna, on shore with Max. Kat steps up in front of Sador, seductive. As long as you can tell the difference. Sador smiles appreciatively, but pulls out his phone. A moment's business, my love. Mahir checks his radio. Ives over the radio. Not clear. Repeat, not clear. The protagonist and Ives look back at the collapsed entrance. We're committed now. They turn and race through the mining tunnel. Ives into the radio. Just hold tight, we're almost there. Neil spots Sador's gray Mi-8 overhead, a rope hanging down. Across the street he sees Volkov reverse exit the tunnel mouth, crouching to de-rig a tripwire booby trap, carrying it toward the chopper, then leaping up onto the line and rising from the streets. Neil stares concerned. He checks his watch. 4:10, 4:09. He then takes off sprinting. Neil! She watches him go ahead, and then signals Blue Team to keep pushing forward. The protagonist and Ives run down the tunnel. They slow as they see a body, blue armband, lying on the ground on the opposite side of a set of bars at the end of the tunnel. They can see into the hypocenter, the giant atomic-hewn cavern, daylight above, capsule on the rock floor next to the mouth of a borehole. The protagonist checks his watch. 4:06, 4:05. Ives checks the electronic lock. We don't have anything big enough to blow this. Try him. The protagonist reaches through the bars and checks the body. Freezes. Attached to a zip, a talisman. A coin with a hole hanging from a small length of orange and yellow string. The protagonist looks at it, quizzical, and rises. Nothing. Can you pick it? Off-screen we hear Sador's voice. I hope not. I paid a lot for that lock. Wham! Ives goes down, shot by Volkov, bullets sparking off his helmet. On the other side of the bars, gun pointed at the protagonist. Field radio held out. Sador's voice echoed through the tunnel. How do you like where my journey began and yours ends? Volkov takes the protagonist's gun and forces him to push Ives' gun through the bars. A little radioactive for my taste. Volkov drops the gun into the water and places the radio by the bars. Sador steps away from Kat as he speaks quietly into the phone. My fate was always bound up with radiation. We'd work where no one else would. We made a devil's bargain. Money for time. We sold our futures. Kat looks at Mahir's boat. Nothing. She looks to the shore. Far in the distance, she can see the tender approaching. The protagonist looks at Volkov, at the bars between him and the capsule. Now you're making the same mistake for the entire world. It wasn't a mistake. I made the bargain I could. What was yours? You fight for a cause you barely understand, with people you trust so little you've told them nothing about what you're doing. When I die, the world dies with me, and your knowledge dies with you, buried in a tomb like an anonymous Egyptian builder, sealed in the pyramid to keep his secret. Neil comes into the turnstile room. He watches enemy troops enter and exit the machine, inverting to join the battle. He waits for his chance. The room is empty. He sees himself through the proving window and runs at the machine. Sador keeps speaking into his phone. Your faith is blind. You're a fanatic. The protagonist into the phone. What's more fanatical than trying to destroy the world? Kat moves towards Sador, but he raises a finger. I'm not. I'm creating a new one. Somewhere, sometime, a man in a crystalline tower throws a switch, and Armageddon is both triggered and avoided. Entropy inverts the same way the magnetic poles have switched 183 times over the millennia. Now time itself switches direction. Sador looks out at the lowering sun. The same sunshine we've basked in will warm the faces of our descendants generations from now. Kat looks at Mahir's boat. Nothing. She looks to shore, watching the tender approaching. The protagonist looks at his watch. 2:12, 2:11. How can they want to destroy us? Because their oceans rose and their rivers ran dry. Don't you see? Their world shriveled because of us. They have no choice but to turn back. There is no life ahead of them, and we are responsible. Knowing this, do you still want me to stop? Yes. Each generation looks out for its own survival. Sador looks at the glittering water. That's exactly what they're doing. Sure, but not you. You're a traitor, bringing death to all because you have no life of your own left. When I'm done, life continues. Not your son's. My greatest sin was to bring a son into a world I knew was ending. Do you think God will forgive me? For killing your son? No. He should understand. He killed his own. Neil forwards now, spots a gray truck outside the turnstile building. He jumps in, firing it up. Racing through the streets, past the imploding/exploding building, racing for the tunnel mouth, trying to head off the protagonist and Ives. Wait! Wait! They dive into the tunnel, which collapses. Neil sets his sights on the hypocenter ridge above, guns the engine. Wheeler leads the blue team toward the Chinooks lowering containers. As they carry their wounded and lurch toward the containers, they see red team reassembling the anti-aircraft guns. In the tunnel, the protagonist watches Volkov pick up a black, metal, geometrically complex bar. The algorithm. You don't believe in God, or a new future, or anything outside your own experience. That's all any of us know. The rest is belief, and I don't have it. Without it, you're not human. You're just a madman. Or a god of sorts. Like I said, Volkov slowly backs toward the capsule with the algorithm. The protagonist looks down at Ives, whose hand is moving. A beep. On the private deck, Sador checks his watch. Our time is up. He looks across at Kat standing by the rail. I'll give my wife your love. You're forgetting. I haven't met her yet. That's right. After you meet her, she dies. I'll just give her my love instead. Volkov seals the capsule and hooks it to a winch. The protagonist watches Ives' hands emerge with a sidearm. Volkov raises the capsule up over the mouth of the deep borehole, then steps back, preparing to release the winch and drop the capsule into the well. Sador goes to hang up. He pauses. An afterthought. Volkov. Volkov rushes forward with his gun. Over the phone in Russian. Shoot him in the head. Volkov pulls the trigger, but the dead Tenet soldier has risen to be in front of the gun, absorbing the bullet, then leaping to one side, alive. Sador hears the shot, satisfied. Kat puts the phone away. Enough business, Andre. The protagonist dives to where Ives is lying and grabs his gun. Volkov turns, running for the winch release. Wait! Wait! He fires at Volkov, who goes down just short of the winch. Ives struggles to his feet, checking his watch. Hearing beeps, Ives looks up. The lock is open. Neil races up the slope to the ridge, through the minefield, setting off personal mines in his wake, narrowly avoiding running himself over. As Kat pours him a drink, Sador looks out at the glowing horizon, fiddled with the silver pill. He points. Tomorrow the sun will rise in that same spot, for the first time in history, because I've told it to. He looks at her, like she's a loyal dog. You have no idea what I'm talking about, do you? She looks at him and smiles sweetly. It sounds terribly important, Andre. He reaches for her. She gets up and moves to the rail. Where are you going? She grabs the hose and starts spraying herself. Aren't you hot? Kat sprays the deck in front of the rail. What are you doing now? I spilled sunscreen. So what? It's slippery. Just come here. She looks at Sador lying on the daybed like an appalling emperor, moves toward him and grabs the sunscreen. Turn over. The sun's almost gone. You'll like it. He rolls over, obedient. She squirts a large dollop across his back, looks up at Mahir's boat, hopeful. Nothing. She checks her watch as she lazily smears the sunscreen across Sador's back. He groans. Kat watches the tender approaching. She can just make out herself and her son. The protagonist watches the dead Tenet soldier racing backward from the gate out of the tunnel. Come on! The protagonist turns and Ives swings the gate open. They race through just before it closes, slamming shut behind them. The tunnel is sealed! The protagonist steps over Volkov and struggles with the capsule. It swings, hanging precariously over the well. Mahir, do you copy? Mahir looks through the binoculars, frustrated, his flare gun ready. Hold! Repeat, hold! Neil reverses toward the hole and jumps out, pulling a line from the rear winch. Kat looks at Mahir's boat, nothing. She checks her watch and looks down at the tender approaching. It's close enough, she can clearly see herself chatting and laughing with Max. She jumps up from the daybed, holding the diver's bag. Sador looks up at her surprised. I can't do this. Don't spoil this moment, Kat. I can't let you think that you've won. Sador looks at her, suddenly wary. What are you talking about, Catherine? I'm not letting you go to your grave thinking we're all coming with you. I can't give you that. She pulls out the silenced pistol. He is utterly unafraid. You're dying alone, Andre. No, I'm not. Andre, look in my eyes. Which do you see, despair or anger? What? I'm not the woman who could find love for you, even though you'd scarred her on the inside. Kat pulls up her shirt to reveal the massive, angry scar. I'm the vengeful bitch you scarred on the outside. Sador realizes he's been conned and lunges for her. You! Kat shoots him in the upper chest. His hand goes to his chest and he gasps, air leaking from his lungs. Kat rolls Sador off the daybed onto his back. He gurgles. She grabs his leg and slides him at the gap below the rail. Sador shoots off the deck, tumbling down to the sea. His head cracks onto the rear platform as he hits the water. Mahir lowers his binoculars, startled, as he sees Sador's body pitch into the sea. She's killed him! Into the radio. She's killed him! Mahir guns the engine, racing toward the yacht. The protagonist opens the capsule of the hypocenter, revealing the algorithm. She jumped the gun! She killed him! The protagonist looks at Ives, ashen. A line drops between them. Neil is at the wheel of the truck. Through the rearview mirror, he looks at his line running into the hole. Through the windshield, he watches red and blue soldiers finish loading and lift off. He checks his watch. 9, 8... fuck it. He guns it, pulling away from the hole. The protagonist and Ives are yanked into the air. The protagonist clutching the algorithm as they approach the rocky edge of the hole. Ives raises his boots to cushion the impact. They bounce painfully over the lip. The truck drags them along the rocky ground, away from the hole, as boom! The rocky ground buckles with force. Smoke and flames blast up out of the hole in an angry plume. The ground around the hole collapses in an ever-growing radius. The line snaps, leaving the protagonist and Ives tumbling to a stop. The subsidence approaches, slowing. The ground opens under the protagonist. Ives grabs him. The protagonist has the algorithm in his hand. Ives pulls him back onto solid ground. Wheeler pulls the last blue team soldier into the container. As her watch hits 0, the container door slams shut. Do you think they made it? Back on the yacht deck, Kat picks up the shell casing, drops it in the diver's bag, zips it up, attaches the lanyard to her ankle, sprays down the deck, washing away blood and sunscreen. Kat steps up to the railing. She watches Mahir down below, getting a line on Sador's body. Kat glances over at the tender, arriving with her earlier self and her son. Kat dives, arcing gracefully through the sunset. Kat's earlier self, stepping onto the yacht, catches a glimpse of a graceful form slicing into the water. She looks curious, but Max tugs her sleeve and she turns. On Mahir's speeding boat, Kat hands Mahir the diver's bag and looks up ahead to the last light of day. The protagonist over the radio. Kat, you jumped the gun! Mahir hands her the radio. I couldn't do it. I couldn't let him die thinking he'd won. And I knew you'd find a way. Silence. She glances Mahir, suddenly concerned. Wait, you found a way. We're okay, right? Yeah, we found a way. Be safe. Mahir's boat speeds away through the twilight, dragging Sador's body behind. A Chinook swirls snow around the blasted ruins. Ives and the protagonist slump bruised and exhausted, gas masks off, breathing hard. On the ground between them, the matte black algorithm. Neil approaches, removing his gas mask. I thought you were inverted. Changed gears halfway. You needed help here. We needed help down there. To the protagonist. How did you get that lock open? It wasn't me. To Neil. Didn't your team need you? I'll get them on the next pass. Right, Ives? Once I've caught my breath. The protagonist reaches for the algorithm. Ives pulls it out of his reach. His gun laying casually across his leg. As Neil and the protagonist watch, Ives takes his weapon in hand and gets to his feet. He lifts the algorithm and looks around at the deserted plain above Stalsk 12. Nice and private. Ives separates the algorithm into 3 components. No one who's seen this leaves the field. We hide it, we end our lives. It's the only way to be sure. Ives tosses them each one component. But as to when, Ives holsters his sidearm. Maybe that's every man's decision to make for himself. You're not gonna kill us? If I ever find you, I will. But you won't look too hard. Yes, I will. Neil shakes his head, smiling at this. Ives heads toward the Chinook. Neil and the protagonist watch him go. You're not heading back to London to check on Kat, are you? Of course not. That would be too dangerous. Even from afar. Even from afar. Ives, wait! Neil takes his section of the algorithm and reattaches it to the protagonist's. You're really going back in? I'm the only one who could have gotten that door open in time, right, Ives? Ives looks at Neil, sizing him up. I don't have any locksmiths as good as you. Neil turns to the protagonist and grabs his backpack. See? That's me in there again, weaving another pass in the fabric of this mission. Neil swings his pack onto his back, revealing a talisman, a coin with a hole tied to the zip with orange and yellow thread. Neil, wait. We just saved the world. We can't leave anything to chance. The protagonist thinks and struggles. But if we change things, what if we do it differently? Neil looks back at the protagonist and sees his struggle. What's happened is happened. He smiles, which is an expression of faith in the mechanics of the world, not an excuse to do nothing. Fate? Call it what you want. What do you call it? Reality. Now let me go. The protagonist lets him walk, tears welling up. He calls out, "Hey!" Neil turns. "You never did tell me who recruited you." Neil smiles. "Haven't you guessed by now? You did. Just not when you thought. You have a future in the past. Years ago for me. Years from now for you. You've known me for years." Neil nods. "For me, I think this is the end of a beautiful friendship. But for me, it's just the beginning. We get up to some stuff. You're gonna love it. You'll see. This whole operation is a temporal pincer." "Whose?" "Yours. You're only halfway there. I'll see you at the beginning, friend." Neil turns and follows Ives to board the Chinook. The protagonist watches him go. "We're the people saving the world from what might have been." The protagonist looks down at the algorithm in his hand. The world will never know what could have happened. He pulls up his collar and walks into the snow. We cut to London in the afternoon. Kat is walking up the road to the school gates. We hear Neil's voice, and even if they did, they wouldn't care. She feels something wrong. Looking across the road, she sees a car with tinted windows shadowing her, because no one cares about the bomb that didn't go off. She gets out the dummy phone the protagonist had given her. Just the one that did. Priya is in the front passenger seat of the car. The driver next to her has a gun and silencer sitting on his knee. "Do it before the boy comes out." The rear door opens. A dull thud. The driver is shot by a silenced pistol. "That's your idea of mercy?" Priya turns. The protagonist has a gun to the back of her seat. "You gave me your word. And I told you what it would be worth. Here, today. How did you know?" He holds up a dumb phone and plays a voicemail. Kat via recording. "Cannon Place, 3 o'clock. It's..." Posterity. Kat hits send and speaks into the phone. "Cannon Place, 3 o'clock. It's probably nothing." The protagonist watches Kat. "I told you, you'd have to start looking differently at the world." "I have to tie up the loose ends." "That was never your job." "Then whose is it?" The protagonist brings his focus back to Priya. "Mine. I realize I wasn't working for you. We've both been working for me. I'm the protagonist." "Then you'd better tie up those loose ends." He shoots her through the back seat and she slumps forward. Mission accomplished. The protagonist looks across the road. The kids stream out. Kat sees Max coming, takes one last look at the dark car. Neil's voice off-screen comes back. "But it's the bomb that didn't go off." Kat shakes her head, smiling at her own folly, and looks at the phone like it's silly. The danger that no one knew was real. She tosses the phone carelessly into her bag. That's the bomb with the real power to change the world. The protagonist catches Kat and Max walk away. Max offers Kat his hand, and we fade out. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. If you made it all the way to the end, congratulations, you are in the top 1% of my viewers. If you haven't already, leave a comment below with what you would like the next movie reading to be, and please just comment and let me know that you listened to the entire thing. I read all the comments on the channel, good and bad, so leave feedback if that's your thing. And I'll see you in the next movie reading.